are these people?
But this is from Kit Clarenberg. He's doing some stuff in Mint Press News this time. And he writes about the Jerusalem conference. You've ever heard about this, Collin?
No.
You heard about the Berlin conference.
But... most of the things most of the things you pull, I don't know of.
Yep. So there's about Team B in the Jerusalem conference, how Israel helped craft modern day terrorism. So there's been a lot of talks about terrorism, Collin. Like what did we talk about recently? George W. Bush leading a monument in DC about the war on terror. Right. So where do you think we started a lot of that war on terror? Might have been another Bush, like this guy over here. Right. So we're gonna get into it, but this is published November 17th. So not too long ago, but since Israel's genocidal assault on Gaza began, Zionist officials, pundits, journalists, and their Western opposite numbers have endlessly invoked the sinister specter of terrorism to justify the industrial-scale slaughter of Palestinians. It is because of terrorism, twice failed U.S. presidential candidate and unconvicted war criminal Hillary Clinton representatively wrote for The Atlantic on November 14th that Hamas must be permanently erased. Destroyed hospitals and schools and civilians killed en masse are reasonable collateral damage, such as the unparalleled evil of terrorists. Yet, the relentless stream of heartrending clips documenting the Israeli occupation force, Holocaust-deluging social media feeds the world over, and the ever-ratcheting child death toll has compelled countless citizens to ask, if Hamas are terrorists, then what are Zionists? It is surely no coincidence YouTube recently yanked the official video of a groundbreaking track by renowned rapper and Mint Press News contributor Low Key, Terrorist, posing this precise question. Terrorist was released in 2011, at the height of the U.S. empire's war on terror. Then, the purported global threat of terrorism, so this was 2011, this video's been up, Collin. They just now took it down.
Right. And we talked about that with Low Key, like how they removed
his Spotify stuff. And that's literally the IDF and the ADL working in conjunction to bully Spotify. And he wasn't the only one censored. So the purported global threat of terrorism was exploited throughout the West to savage civil liberties at home and wage relentless illegal military interventions abroad. Mainstream usage of the term precipitously plummeted thereafter. It is only now regaining popular currency due to the Gaza genocide. There is no accident, as we shall see. Israel, and specifically its Western leader Benjamin Netanyahu, was fundamentally to concocting the mainstream conception of terrorism explicitly to delegitimize anti-imperial struggles while validating Western state violence directed at oppressed peoples across the global South. The impact of this informational assault can be felt in every corner of the world, not least Gaza. In fact, one might reasonably conclude the specific foundations of Nakba 2 Electric Boogaloo, which is unfolding in grisly real time right now, were laid decades ago as a result of the conveniences of Netanyahu, the International Zionist Lobby, and the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. What follows is the little-known history of how terrorism came to meet a majority of the world's population, the Palestinian people in particular, live with the mephitic consequences every day. So, our story starts 1976, Care Bear, at the peak of detente between the U.S. and Soviet Union, right? After 2.5 decades of bitter enmity, the two superpowers resolved a peaceful coexistence at the start of the decade. They collaborated to systematically dismantle the structures and doctrines that defined the immediate post-World War II era, such as mutually assured destruction. So we're trying to deal with some nukes there, Care Bear. What country also has those? Just if you were to take a guess. But in May of that year, the CIA produced its annual National Intelligence Estimate, a comprehensive report combining data from various intelligence agencies intended to be a basis for crafting foreign policy. In keeping with the past 5 years, it concluded the Soviets were in severe economic decline, favored diplomacy over conflict, and desperately sought an end to the Cold War. Such findings lay behind Washington's push for détente and Moscow's eager acceptance of major disarmament and arms control treaties. However, newly appointed CIA Director George H.W. Bush categorically rejected these conclusions. He sought a second opinion and constructed an independent intelligence cell to review the NIE, known as Team B. It was composed of hardcore Cold Warriors, defense industry-funded hawks, and rabid anti-communists. Among them were several individuals who would become leading figures in the neocon movement, such as Paul Wolfowitz. Also present were the infamous CIA and Pentagon dark arts specialists who've been professionally ostracized due to détente. One of those. Team B duly reviewed the NIE and rubbished each and every one of the agency's findings. Rather than dilapidated, impoverished, and teetering on total collapse, the Soviet Union was, in fact, more deadly and dangerous than ever, having constructed a vast array of first-strike capabilities right under the CIA's collective nose. To reach these bombshell conclusions, Team B relied on a confounding hodgepodge of peculiar logical fallacy, paranoid theorizing, crazed conspiratorial conjecture, unsupported value judgments, amateurish circular reasoning. So, look, there they are. There's HW, Gerald Ford. Look, they're looking over a map of Lebanon right there, Care Bear. Beirut. So, for example, Team B repeatedly assessed that a lack of evidence Moscow possessed weapon systems, military technology, or surveillance capabilities comparable or superior to Washington's own was inverse proof that the Soviets in fact did. They were so sophisticated and innovative, Team B concluded, that they couldn't be detected or even comprehended by the West. Team B's analysis was confirmed to be a total fantasy when the USSR collapsed, yet its methods informed all subsequent NIEs throughout the Cold War and likely endure today. On June 27th of that year, mere weeks after Team B was set to work on reigniting the Cold War, Air France Flight 139, en route to Paris from Tel Aviv, was hijacked by members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Redirected to a Ugandan airport, the plane was greeted on the runway by Idi Amin, military at least, right, who ushered the passengers, the majority of whom were Jewish or Israeli, into the terminal, watched over by scores of soldiers intended to prevent their escape or rescue. The hijackers relayed a demand to the government of Israel. Unless a ransom of $5 million was paid to them and 53 Palestinian prisoners were released from jail, the hostages would be executed. In response, 100 elite IOF commandos launched an audacious action to free the hostages. Their mission, known as the Entebbe Raid, was a stunning success. All but 4 hostages were rescued alive. And the IOF lost just one commander, Yonatan Netanyahu, the older brother of Israel's sitting Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. For years, by that point, Israeli officials have been attempting to popularize the term terrorism to explain the motivations and actions of Palestinian freedom fighters. That way, the religious fury and repression could be reframed as a destructive ideology of violence for violence sake, without rationale, and Zionist colonial tyranny as warranted self-defense. This effort became turbocharged in September 1972 in the kidnapping of 11 Israeli athletes at that year's Olympics in Munich by Palestinian militants, ended with all hostages murdered. You remember that, right? Or at least heard about that. So, what does this bit sound like? This terrorism to explain the motivations and violent for violence sake. You ever heard that phrasing before?
Violence for violence sake.
Yep.
I mean,
like people are inherently violent in some way.
Well, yeah, I think that's I think people are not necessarily saying that, but that's the stereotypical view of Arabs.
Yep.
Or basically anyone melanated, more or less.
Like, sounds of the South and whatnot. Right. Song of the South.
Most of like Black and Arab people, like the darker you are, the more threatening you are.
Right.
So,
yep.
And more prone to violence, if anything.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right, and it's almost like I don't know if you've ever looked at the Israeli justice system, but it has some parallels to our justice system. It has an 85% conviction rate, Collin. 85%. So that means everyone accused, 85% of them convicted.
Right.
I mean, I don't know about math, but that's a lot. I mean, like 5-year-olds when they're like, which we've been seeing. But I digress. This particularly public bloodshed centered world attention on Israel and left Western citizens wondering what could have possibly inspired such actions. Zionists had hitherto managed to largely conceal their systemic, state-enforced repression and displacement of Palestinians from the outside world. Journalists were kept well away from the scenes of major crimes. At the same time, Amnesty International's Israeli branch was secretly financed and directed by Tel Aviv's Ministry of Foreign Affairs to whitewash facts on the ground. For the Nethanyahu family, the Intim raid was a tragedy, but also an ideal opportunity to validate and internationalize the concept of terrorism. As espoused by Zionists in 1979, Benjamin Netanyahu founded the Jonathan Institute in honor of his slain brother. Its purpose, he said, was to focus public attention on the grave threat that international terrorism poses to all democratic societies, to study the real nature of today's terrorism, and to propose measures from combating and defeating the international terror movements. When was this, Collin? 1979. We're almost to the 80s. Okay, so look at this guy in 83. Okay, little fresh-faced Netanyahu here is explaining what
Bibi.
Terrorism is not. This is what he thinks is not terrorism. Okay,
I try to give an instance of what terrorism is not. In 1944, the British Royal Air Force sets out on a bombing mission. The target is the Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen. Perfect target. The planes loose the bombs, drop the bombs, and they miss. Instead of the Gestapo headquarters, they hit a children's hospital, and scores of children are horribly killed. This is an accidental, tragic outcome of war. This can happen, but it is not terrorism.
So
what was the last part? It's not terrible.
Not terrorism. Is what he says there.
Let me try to give it.
But yeah, essentially stating that if you miss a target and a bomb accidentally falls on a Christian's hospital, it's not terrorism. That's his personal belief. He was relating the British doing that, so they learned it from watching you, Dad. Is what he's saying. So in July that year, the Institute, convened the Jerusalem Conference on International Terrorism in Jerusalem's Hilton Hotel. It gathered together a 700-strong mob of Israeli government officials, U.S. lawmakers, intelligence operatives from across the Five Eyes global spying network, and Western foreign policy apparatchiks. Hopefully I'm using that right. Perhaps unsurprisingly, apparatchiks. Perhaps unsurprisingly, many representatives of Team B were in attendance. For 4 days and 7 separate sessions, speaker after speaker painted a disturbing picture of the worldwide phenomenon of terrorism. Care Bear. I wonder if something similar might have happened recently with people like Elon Musk and showing them acts of terrorism, quote unquote. It's almost like they've had some practice at this. Yes.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially if AIPAC is involved.
Yes, yes, it is.
Like, because I was, unfortunately, I know you're not going to like this, but I did listen to Briandra Gray, some of her interview with Ryan Grimm yesterday en route to work. And he mentioned, and we talked about AIPAC last week, of how their hand is just really deep in terms of the U.S. government. I mean, we saw it today in that resolution that was voted on, that pretty much everybody in the damn House voted for it. And then Tlaib voted present for it, which, but, AIPAC has had plenty of practice, plenty of money, and plenty of time to really, season their efforts to ensure that, they basically rule Congress.
Yeah.
And the matter of speaking,
It's so interesting to see how they're going to spin this in a second, because there's definitely parallels with what they've been doing now about tying it to the quote unquote Soviet Union, right? I guarantee you, if you are pro-Palestinian in any way, you will also be pro-Russian very quickly.
I'm sure.
They unanimously declared that all terrorists constituted a single, organized political movement that was being secretly financed, armed, trained, and directed by the Soviet Union. This devilish nexus, it was claimed, posed a mortal threat to Western democracy, freedom, and security, requiring a coordinated response. Eerily, as academic Diana Rolfe later observed, the JCIT's collective prescription for tackling this purported menace was precisely what transpired just over 2 decades later during the War on Terror, the Gulf War, all that fun stuff. So, this included preemptive attacks on states that are alleged to support terrorists, an elaborate intelligence system apparatus / civil liberties, particularly for Palestinians targeted as potential terrorists, including detention without charge and torture, and propaganda to dehumanize terrorists in the eyes of the public. Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin addressed the JCIT's opening session. He set the tone by claiming Western state violence was ultimately a fight for freedom or liberation, and therefore fundamentally opposed to terrorism. He concluded his remarks by imploring the assembled throng to go forth and promote the conference message once it was over, and they did so. So, the only democracy in the Middle East, right, Care Bear? So here he is. This is this conference. Look, it's at the Jerusalem Hilton, Care Bear. Wouldn't you like to stay at that hotel? You think they give good, breakfast in the morning? Probably not, right?
I'm sure for this.
What is the method? Well, see. They are enemies of democracy. And I, myself, one of previous underground fighters, state here and now that wherever you can decide issues by the ballot, you must under no circumstances use the bullet from either direction or left, either right or left. Therefore, the New Left, a reactionary dark movement, fights democracy in Italy and in France and in Germany and in Japan and in other countries, but mainly the European countries, in which Jewish blood flew from the Rhine to the Danube and from the Bug to the Volga, with comfort and support to the so-called PLO, the basest armed organization ever.
Do we got to go back for people to see who that was?
To the so-called PLO.
Who's that?
Is that Biden? That almost doesn't look like him.
No, it's not. It's Mr. Hugh Fraser.
Okay. the basest
Okay,
arm
this
of
kind
the
of looked like Biden there.
organization.
If I can catch that card.
It doesn't matter.
Since the days of the Nazis. You cannot expect to overcome your own terrorism if you open offices of the PLO in your capitals, if you accept them into the United Nations, if you give the representative the right to sit around the table of the Security Council,
As far as terrorism is concerned, except in the immediate aftermath of some IRA outrage, we tend to be a nation believing it can't happen here.
He's talking about what? The IRA being a terrorist organization? Yep. When they were definitely a liberation force, you know?
Right. I remember that.
Yep.
As I do, then you must join me in wondering why the community of liberal democracies has not banded together more effectively to oppose these international murders. The PLO attacks against moderate Palestinians, the murder of a moderate leader in the Gaza is a recent brutal example. I can go on and on. My colleagues have given us a good bill of particulars.
His colleagues gave him particulars, Care Bear. So notice they were talking about the PLO there. What did they do about the PLO, Collin? Do you know? We talked about this. They funded a particular group in Gaza to become leader. You know, to combat the
sounds like
secular PLO.
It sounds like a certain spread.
Yes, it does. Yep, that hummus.
And maybe sometimes on.
You know, so among the JCIT attendees were American author and journalist Claire Sterling, who cut her teeth as a reporter decades earlier at the Overseas News Agency, an MI6 propaganda operation. Seeking to boost U.S. public support for entering World War II, following the conference, he frequently amplified the claims of JCIT speakers and articles from prominent newspapers, leading to an epic March 1981 front-page expose of the New York Times. Terrorism, tracing the international network. Okay, so, you know, propaganda goes way back. A book published later that year, The Terror Network, expanded significantly on Sterling's oeuvre and firmly cemented the notion of Moscow as a grand spider sat in the middle of a vast, globe-spanning web of deadly political violence in the Western public mind. It caused a sensation upon release, receiving rave reviews from major news outlets, being translated into 22 languages, Care Bear, and becoming a bestseller in several countries. That book right there, in case you wanted to, you know, pitch it out a window. So, most significantly of all, the Terror Network has a particular potent impact on newly inaugurated President Ronald Reagan and his CIA chief William Casey, committed anti-communists. They entered office desperately seeking a pretext for brutally crushing left-wing nationalist opposition to U.S. imperialism in Latin America. Sterling's work provided ample ammunition for achieving that blood-soaked objective and was key to the White House decisively shattering detent, and process began by Team 5 years earlier. Consequently, the Terror Network was circulated among U.S. lawmakers and heavily promoted overseas on the Reagan administration's dime. Casey furthermore tasked his agency with verifying its thesis. They quickly assessed Sterling's work to be irredeemable garbage. Okay? This is their agency. Ironically enough, it was heavily influenced by CIA black propaganda. Enraged, Casey demanded the evaluation be revised. An updated appraisal was less scathing, but nonetheless stressed the book was uneven and the reliability of its sources varies widely, while significant portions were incorrect. Still dissatisfied, Casey asked a CIA senior review panel charged with scrutinizing Langley's former estimates to write their own report on the subject. They concluded the Soviets did offer limited financial material and practical assistance to a handful of anti-imperial Global South liberation movements, some of which were labeled terrorist by Western powers. But there was insufficient evidence of Muscovite culpability for the entire global phenomenon of terrorism, yet alone funding and directing such entities as dedicated policy. So they're saying that it's full of shit, this whole premise.
Yeah.
So, undeterred, when Casey personally delivered the report to Reagan, he allegedly said of its findings, "Of course, Mr. President, you and I know better." So it was CIA-backed death squads that ran roughshod across Washington's backyard throughout the 1980s in the name of neutralizing Soviet influence in the region. Their actions were heavily informed by the agency's guerrilla warfare manual, which encouraged assassinations of government officials and civilian leaders and deadly attacks on soft targets, such as schools and hospitals. Sounds familiar. Terrorism, in other words. So, another example of Reagan's terrorism was sponsoring Afghanistan's Mujahideen resistance fighters in their battle with, ironically enough, the Soviet Red Army. This policy endured after the evil empire was vanquished. The same militants were transported to Bosnia and Kosovo in the 1990s to aid and abet the painful, forced death of Yugoslavia. Okay? So, in case people forget what those guys became, that's called Al-Qaeda now. In case people forgot. So, when these covert actions produced blowback in the form of the 9/11 attacks, well, we couldn't possibly remember why they'd be upset, Care Bear. Why would they ever do this? That is, if you believe they did it, which you shouldn't. Right. You shouldn't do that. Several individuals who attended the JCIT and their acolytes were elevated to the Bush administration due to their supposed terrorism expertise. Meanwhile, with public and state-level fears of terrorism ramping up significantly the world over, many Western countries turned to Israel for advice and guidance on how to tackle the issue. As Netanyahu commented in 2008, we are benefiting, and I'm going to say this a couple of times so people get this. We are benefiting from one thing, this is Netanyahu, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon and the American struggle in Iraq. That's Benjamin Netanyahu saying Israel benefits from the Twin Towers being blown up. Okay? Just if we want to, just a very shallow level of this rabbit hole you can go down. There's a video by Joe, shut the fuck up shitlib, on, on a particular country doing 9/11. It's on Twitter. Go find that. It's like 30 minutes. Please watch it. Share it with your friends. This is not only because 9/11 swung American public opinion in Israel's favor. In a blink, Zionist repression and slaughter were transformed from a source of international embarrassment and obloquy into a compelling sales pitch and unique selling point for Tel Aviv's welter of defense and security firms. The occupied territory became laboratories, their inhabitants test subjects, upon whom new weaponry, surveillance methods, and pacification techniques could be trialed by the IOF. He means the IDF, but he's making a point. Then marketed and sold overseas. It is not for nothing The graphic videos showing IDF surgical strikes on Palestinians, their homes, schools, and hospitals are proudly displayed at international arms fairs and private demonstrations of invasive surveillance tools such as Pegasus routinely wow repressive foreign security and intelligence agencies behind closed doors. On top of a significant financial benefit, there is a diplomatic dividend to Israel secures an invaluable censor-stifling goodwill from customers, therefore permitting the Zionist project of permanently purging Palestine of its indigenous inhabitants to persist untrampled. We see a palpable demonstration of this currently, while the streets of almost every major Western city have regularly teemed with pro-Palestine fervor ever since the latest attack on Gaza began. The protesters' elected representatives are at best silent, at worst actively complicit. Impassioned chants of "We are all Palestinians" have been a frequent fixture at these events. This rallying call is highly apposite, for in addition to expressing sympathy and solidarity with the Palestinian people, it is urgently incumbent upon us all to reflect that the very same techniques and technologies of control and oppression to which they have been so cruelly subjected daily for decades have firmly trained on us as well. As a result of Israel's invention of terrorism, as such, it is no exaggeration to say Palestinians are canaries in the coal mine of humanity. Care Bear, thoughts?
Yes, sir. Ay. I mean,
yep.
The rabbit hole goes deep with Israel. I think
and the
we
war
might
on
have
terror.
to do a separate. I think we have to do a separate playlist on what we've talked about on Israel over the last few weeks, because it just proves that it's a lot deeper. It just, even with the history that I think a lot of people already know, but it's just so much more to it.
Yeah, there's decades. There's decades of this. You know.
Well, I think, given the history in terms of Zionism and how that plays out, but I think even thinking in not so recent history, just within the last 40 years, how they've been able to shift this idea, and like basically they, thanks to Bibi, just redefine what terrorism is for their benefit. And,
not just redefined,
again,
they defined it. Like,
right.
For us.
But again, right. And again, I have to say, like, Bibi met with AIPAC this week.
Recently.
Was it?
And Elon.
Yeah,
and
recently.
Which we know Elon.
So
Elon is letting a Israeli tech firm run his verification process now. So you got to give some Israeli company your data. I mean, it's, those fingers are everywhere. They're everywhere.
And so
there's a,
so it's just,
there's a video game.
Go ahead.
And it's, I don't even know if you want to call it a video game. It's Hearts of Iron, what it's called. And it's essentially like you get to run a country in World War II. Right. And it starts just before the war. Right. So there's a part of that game where it's all, you get to send envoys, right? You get to leave dissonance in the countries and try to sway public opinion, right? So that, I don't know, let's say you wanted a fascist New Zealand, that's possible if you go through all these steps, right? It's just an interesting way to think about that. That's what the Israelis have been doing. After the war, they've been sending a ton of lobbying and propagandists and people supportive of their cause, so that, every politician and businessman and whatever is heavily connected, and they just have ears in the room. it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. It's literally just, access and connection and power and money and trust, like standard stuff that we've been dealing with since. It's like I feel like a lot of our brothers and sisters woke up during that war on terror because it was so blatant, thanks to Julian Assange, that they were lying to us the whole time,
Right.
And then before that, it was the Cold War, where people found out your government was lying to you the whole time. So it's just more of the same. So start there, start with how they're lying to you, and then go from there. So, follow the money. Not hard. Usually it ends up being over resources. So, but anyway, anything to add?
Really, no, I think it's, as I said, it's just really mind-blowing how sticky the hand is with the Israel lobby and just how all of these connections. I think, you can argue really going back to the turn of the century and how they've had the time to really perfect their craft, essentially, to where we are now. It just makes me think if the Arab lobby, which, to be fair, I think in regards to voting, against Biden now, I've seen a lot more
that bloc be
Arab
a bigger problem. Yeah,
bloc being I think I just think in terms more on protests, like they're more or less being mobilized.
You're seeing some of the Democrats go, "Hey guys, brown people might not like us right now." Like,
right?
That's pretty much it, which I find fucking despicable, because it's like you don't give a fuck about the issue, you care about how the issue affects your voting potential. Like, fuck you. But
I wonder, and I wonder if there's someone we could talk more about this, is the idea of like, could these Arab organizations, like, what would need to be done? Because at the end of the day, this all involves money. Like, you could say, "Oh, I'm not going to vote for the duopoly all you want."
Well, this is the thing.
Without the money,
those lanes are open, just not with our country. They're already going to other countries for that support. So,
but without the money kind of backing that, it's going to be like we're still going to have to deal with the Israel lobby, for the foreseeable future. So I just wonder if there's someone we could talk to just to kind of see the viability of what is happening from what I'm kind of seeing online.
Well, you're seeing a lot of economic things happening.
Being more organized to counter AIPAC. I don't think so, but I think at minimum being able to kind of throw a wrench into like some of this planning and kind of this, I mean, I imagine it would be extremely difficult given the practice the lobbyists had and the kind of influence they have over pretty much everyone in government. But something has to be done. I think just in general to kind of think about getting money out of politics, but obviously the Israel lobby is like the biggest dealer here, or if not among the biggest. So how to counter that?
Well, and you're seeing,
not even speaking on the grassroots, but not just even like on the grassroots level, but financially. How you're going to how can we counter like the money and influence that does exist within that?
Yep. Well, I'm sure we'll be talking more about this very stuff.
Who are these people?
So this is from Mint Press. Big fans of them over here. Jessica Buxbaum, from Mint Press does some pretty good work on this. The reality of Gaza's forced exodus, unveiling Israel's secret plan. Boo, boo, boo. A fucking secret plan, Collin. Turns out not so secret either, but it's been a plan for a minute. So last weekend, Israeli newspaper Local Call leaked an official Israeli government document recommending what Palestinians have been saying Israel is already trying to execute with its war on Gaza. The forcible transfer of Gaza's 2.3 million Palestinian population to Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. We've been talking about this all night. Sinai, yeah. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office acknowledged the intelligence ministry's proposal's exit. Still, it dismissed it in a statement to the Times of Israel as a concept paper, the likes of which are prepared at all levels of the government and security agencies. So immediate backpedal. Immediate. Yeah. Just hit that little backpedal, fucking little crossfade, goes for the 3. So, yet Israel's actions, circulating information, and international support all signal that this policy on paper is quickly transitioning to the policy on the ground. This reminds me of the talks about, and I forget who it was, and someone will let me know in the chat, but talking to an American general where he hands him a paper and like goes, this is what we're doing in Iraq and Afghanistan and whatever. It has nothing to do with 9/11. We're just going to invade these 7 countries. And he then whistle blew on that, and everyone was like, no, that's not what's going to happen. Turns out exactly what happened. That's what this sounds like. So the document dated October 13th calls for Israel to evacuate the Gazan civilian population to Sinai, first by establishing tent cities and then building new towns in northern Sinai. Following the resettlement, the paper recommends to create a sterile zone of several kilometers inside Egypt and not allow the population to return to activity or residence near the Israeli border. Wesley Clark is what Desert Mantis saying. That's who whistle blew on that thing I talked about earlier. What does that sound like, Collin? We've seen some things in history very related to that.
Right, but what I was thinking immediately, this gives precedence to what Daniela Weiss was saying in our previous.
Yes. Yep.
You know.
Yep. Like, send them over to Egypt and Sinai
and what will keep Netanyahu in power? If people like her are making that demand that we want them out, we want them into Egypt so we can essentially take that over too, you know, Bibi is going to go for it if he wants to maintain his position. So it just kind of shows.
Yeah, it's like
that's why they're voted in, even though their politics, I think, are disastrous.
Like the evangelical vote of Israel is causing this,
right,
over and over again. That is, if they have a democracy that works at all, you know, which we know they don't, because when they put in one of his competitors, it was the same. Wait, I gotta go back. So Netanyahu is already attempting to put this plan into action. Last week, the Israeli prime minister sought to convince European leaders to pressure Egypt into accepting refugees from Gaza. You're already seeing that all over the place now, right? Well, why won't all these other places accept them? Right? That's what you're hearing. This is that. Okay, so according to the Financial Times, diplomats from France, Germany, and the UK, however, dismissed the idea, citing Egypt's strong rejection of the displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. While that avenue failing, Netanyahu is now reportedly proposing to write off a large chunk of Egypt's debt through the World Bank.
Oh, God.
Yeah. World Bank. Everyone's favorite BRICS alternative. So, yeah. To incentivize the country to take in Gaza's population. Now, we've talked about this a bit, at least with Indy. I think I've talked about this, where it's like, it's what is that called, Care Bear, when you send people and like have money attached, right? You are literally giving them money in the tune of like debt cancellation. What's that called? So like you could literally do the math, right? Which I'm sure we'll get to. That's called, for the kids playing at home, slavery. That's what that's called. Okay? You're just like, here, accept some of our refugees for fucking money.
Right.
So anyway, everything that has been spelled out in this document in terms of the modalities is everything that we're seeing right now. International human rights lawyer Diana Boutou told Mint Press News. The plan's first phase details Israel's aerial bombardment of the northern section of the Gaza Strip and the moving of the population of over 1 million people to the south. The second stage outlines Israel's ground invasion beginning in the north and then taking over the whole region. Okay? So exactly what's been happening?
Right.
Compressing,
definitely in play right now.
Yeah. Compressing Palestinians to smaller and smaller areas may just be the first of what will ultimately be the fulfillment of these plans on paper. Adam Shapiro. We've heard this Shapiro name come up frequently here of late.
I mean, hopefully not related.
Fucking P word. But, you know, I don't know if there's a relation, Ben, but maybe, I don't know. So you don't call anymore. The controversial intelligence ministry document isn't the only police paper recommending 2.3 million Gazans forcible transfer to Egypt. Collin, what is that called? We've talked about this before. What is that forcible transfer to Egypt? Like, called a war crime? That right there, that's called forcible deportation. That's a war crime, just a war crime. There's one among many being committed in this region right now. Israel security think tank Mizgiv, Mizgav, I would imagine, for the Institute for National Security and Zionist Strategy. Okay. Published a paper written by Mizgav researcher Amir Whiteman on October 17th entitled A Plan for Resettlement and Final Rehabilitation in Egypt of the Entire Population of Gaza. Economic Aspects. Whitman is an activist with Netanyahu's Likud party and reportedly a close associate of Intelligence Minister Gila Gamliel. The report calls for Israel to transfer as many Gazans as possible to other countries. Any other alternative, including PA rule, is a strategic failure. Therefore, Gaza's population should be transferred to the Sinai Desert and the displaced absorbed in other countries. Mizgav published the paper on X, formerly known as Twitter. That's because it is Twitter. Along with a tweet outlining the paper's central arguments. The post was deleted following widespread backlash. The original tweet rascally wabbits. The tweet read, "There is currently a unique and rare opportunity to evacuate the entire Gaza Strip in coordination with the Egyptian government. An immediate, realistic, and sustainable plan for the resettlement and humanitarian rehabilitation of the entire Arab population in the Gaza Strip is required, which aligns well with the economic and geopolitical interests of Israel, Egypt, the United States, and guess who, Care Bear? Saudi Arabia.
Saudi.
Yeah. In 2017, it was reported that there are about 10 million vacant housing units in Egypt, of which about half are built and half are under construction. For example, in the two largest satellite cities of Cairo, there's a huge amount of built and empty apartments owned by the government and private parties, and construction areas sufficient to house about 6 million inhabitants. Collin, how many you think are in Cairo houseless right now? If you were to take a guess.
Oh God, I would say 2 million.
But you know what you don't get for housing them? Your debt's paid off.
Right.
Okay. So the average cost of a 3-room apartment with an area of 95 square meters for an average Gazan family consisting of 5.14 people in one of the two cities indicated above is $19,000, Care Bear. That's it. $19,000 for a family of how many? You want to round that up? Yeah. 5 people. You know, taking into account the currently known size of the entire population living in the Gaza Strip, which ranges from about 1.4 to approximately 2.2 million people, one can estimate that the total amount required and be transferred to Egypt to finance the project will be on the order of $5 to $8 billion. Injecting an immediate stimulus of such size into the Egyptian economy would provide a tremendous and immediate benefit to al-Sisi's regime. These sums, in retaliation to the Israel economy, are minimal. Investing a few $1 billion, even if it's 20 or 30 billion, to solve this difficult issue is an innovative, cheap, and sustainable solution. Okay? There's no doubt that in order for this plan to be realized, many conditions must exist concurrently. Currently, these conditions are optimal, and it is unclear when another such opportunity will arise, if ever. Misgov subsequently published another paper related to Gaza entitled Hamas Enjoys Widespread Support Among Gaza's Population, written by Misgov fellow Yishai Armani on October 19th. Okay, in this essay, Armani details the considerable support Hamas enjoys from its constituents, writing, despite claims now being made that the majority of the public in Gaza desires peace and is being held captive by Hamas, data and evidence collected over the past 2 decades consistently demonstrates the opposite. Hamas enjoys widespread support among Gaza's civilian population. The paper then concludes that claims regarding the existence of a clear ideological or political demarcation between the majority of Gaza's residents and Hamas are entirely unfounded. Sure they are, guy. While Armani makes clear not to conflate civilians with Hamas militants, he does note that Hamas's popularity among Gaza's residents should be taken into account with regard to decisions related to the military campaign and to post-war arrangements in the Gaza Strip. The Misgov Institute did not respond to Mint Press News' request for comment on these position papers. Israel legal advisor Itlay Epstein explained on social media how the views outlined in Misgov's recent documents are already translating into action. According to leaflets airdropped on northern Gaza from the Israel military, anyone who doesn't leave for the south could be considered affiliated with Hamas. Furthermore, yes. Yep. After the exactly. Everyone is Hamas. Don't worry about it. Furthermore, Misgov's executives already appear integral in crafting government legislation. Misgov is headed by former Netanyahu National Security Advisor, Meir Ben Shabbat, an influential figure in the Israeli security sphere and one of the architects of Israel's normalization deals with the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco. Misgov is also funded by the Kohelet Policy Forum, now notorious for being behind the current Israeli government's judicial overhaul plans. The Institute's founder and former chairs are also entwined with the Israeli government. Former chairman Yoaz Hendel served as Israel's Minister of Communications. Moshe Alon served as defense minister under Netanyahu. Moshe Aarons also worked as Israel's defense minister and foreign affairs minister. Natan Sharansky served as interior minister and as deputy prime minister. One of the critical points in the intelligence ministry's document stressed the need for harnessing international support for the expulsion plan, something analysts argue Israel's Western allies are already doing. Care Bear.
Yeah.
On October 20th, the White House sent a $14 billion funding request to Congress for aid to Israel, Gaza, and Ukraine. The letter's language has come under scrutiny for suggesting the forcible displacement of Gazans to other countries. Oh, y'all didn't know that shit was in there, huh? Y'all didn't know about that shit. This is why. Okay?
What does the letter say?
These resources would support displaced and conflict-affected civilians, including Palestinian refugees in Gaza and the West Bank, and to address potential needs of Gazans fleeing to neighboring countries.
Wait, pause.
Yes.
Pause.
Yeah.
Pause.
Yeah.
No, this gives the idea that
remember that
Gazans
Band-Aid?
are leaving on their own accord.
Yes. Remember that Band-Aid? The Band-Aid that they put, remember that, like, oh, we can beat your wife, but, like, we'll put a Band-Aid on it and give her some bottled water for, like, that's,
Yeah.
like, that was this. This was the Band-Aid that they got, but guess what it's tied to, Care Bear? Guess what that aid is tied to? So for you to get the aid, that means you got to do what?
You got to go.
You got to fucking go. Like, so either get the fuck out or die.
Right.
That's what this is.
I'm sorry, this has to be clipped. Honestly, like this should be clipped. This should be all over Twitter, honestly.
Yeah.
Because like this just gives more proof like this humanitarian aid
is
that what we're hearing on mainstream is bullshit.
Is fucking bullshit.
It's always the devil. I say it all the time. The devil's
in the fucking details, ain't it? Ain't it fucking in there? Yep.
well, it's worse than what we thought because it's the idea of like, oh, they get the aid, but they will continue to bomb. No, it's like
Mastermind Hour. First, you get the aid,
and they will bomb your ass anyway. But you got to leave anyhow.
Mastermind Hour. First, you get the aid. Then you get the power, and then you get the women. In other words, Collin, cash rules everything around me. Gotta get the money. Dollar bill, y'all. Like, that's literally like they're trying to make him an offer they can't refuse. Like,
well, honestly, like this article, I think that was Crab saying secret plan. This isn't a secret. Like,
yes, but it's
especially if you've been watching. This might be secret to the normies, but like for us who's been kind of watching this, we knew that this kind of shit was going to happen in some way, shape, or form. But I didn't realize how blatant this actually was in terms of, this is kind of this. I think if anything, this is kind of showing that like what we've been thinking is happening a lot sooner than anticipated. I figured they will just kind of continue blowing shit up for an indeterminate amount of time. No, it's like, get out now, like, and go to Egypt.
Yep. Someone said that
we'll bomb you there too.
Ben Sharpie only Twitter account got me suspended in that hell site. He's Mossad. Collin, do you know what? Mossad is Sod is a Hebrew word. Okay. And we asked them what it meant. Like, could you give us a translation? Right? Do you know what they called it? The
What?
Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. Spell that out for me, please. If that's like, your
Israeli.
yeah. Secret
Wait, say the words again. Secret.
Intelligence
Oh.
Service.
Oh.
Otherwise known as
ISIS.
yes. Yeah, kind of a little bit. Maybe that's why they tried to call it ISIL for a bit. They didn't want it confused. But just saying. I mean, I'm not saying it's a coinky dink, but it is kind of coinky dinky, isn't it? So Don slammed the White House's request language and called on Congress to reject the supplementary funding bill. Okay, but we know how that worked.
Right.
The Biden administration isn't just giving a green light for ethnic cleansing, it's bankrolling it. Sarah Lee Winston, Don's executive director, said in a statement, gaslighting Americans into facilitating long-held Israeli plans to depopulate Gaza under the cover of humanitarian aid is a cruel and grotesque hoax. While the White House requests to acknowledge the possibility of Gazans being expelled during the war, U.S. President Joseph Biden had previously advocated against this forcible displacement. The White House did not respond.
Whatever. He's pussy popped and backtracks on every single thing that he said. So,
yep.
So whatever. Like,
the White House did not respond to Mint Press's news inquiries for comment on the aid bill. Mint Press, when the fuck White House respond to any of your questions, let alone this one in particular? Like, I mean, I feel you, but I feel like, I'm like, I know why you're doing that. That's like, they ain't saying shit. I know they ain't saying shit. They never say shit. The Americans are supporting Israel and creating the conditions on the ground that are catastrophic from a humanitarian perspective, Don Shapiro told Mint Press News. So far, the U.S. has repeatedly rejected calls for a ceasefire in Israel's war on Gaza. However, Biden recently advocated for a pause to secure the release of American captives held by Hamas. The U.S. has also sent senior army officials to advise Israel's military on its ground invasion into Gaza and increased its arms and troops in the Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean regions. This has included shipments of armored jeeps and advanced weaponry to Israel. Footage circulating online has also shown U.S. manufactured weapons containing white phosphorus being used in Israel's assault on Gaza. These artillery shells were made by Pine Bluff Arsenal. Feel free to put that into Google Maps. A chemical weapons manufacturer based in Arkansas, known for supplying white phosphorus ammunition. Guess whose neck of the wood that is, Care Bear? Arkansas. Who you know from Arkansas? Like,
I have no idea.
They've been in power a few times.
Oh, the Clintons, whatever.
Yeah. You think they've made any money on Pine Bluff? You think?
Oh, of course they have.
Okay, probably connected to the Waldens, who are also there. So the majority of the world is opposed to this attack on Gaza, Bhuttu said, but still Western Europe, the United States, and Canada are not. Bhuttu described the U.S. as totally complicit in Israel's displacement of Palestinians in Gaza, saying this is an Israeli plan that will be signed off on by the Americans, by the Canadians, by Europe, and so on. Israel's policy papers promoting the ethnic cleansing of Gaza simply mirror what many Israeli politicians and media pundits have expressed since the beginning of the war. Member of Israeli Parliament Ariel Colliner called for repeating the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians during Israel's establishment as a state in 1948, known otherwise as the Nakba, or catastrophe in Arabic, except on a much larger scale. You know, I don't know, there's another Jewish word about breaking glass, you know, might be similar. Right now, one goal, Nakba. A Nakba that will overshadow the Nakba of 1948, Kalner wrote on Twitter. Dror Adyar, Israel's former ambassador to Italy, called for the complete destruction of Gaza during a live interview with Italian channel Reti 4. Quattro. For us, there is a purpose to destroy Gaza, to destroy the absolute evil, he said. Absolute evil. Mastermind Hour Kristallnacht, that would be the German word, I think. But, you know, German Jewish, same diff, right? At least the Nacht part is. As Israel continues carpet bombing Gaza, and as even a sliver of humanitarian aid struggles to trickle into the besieged enclave, another Nakba, or arguably just another chapter in this genocidal series, is rapidly being carried out. So this has just been a continuation since 48, Bhutto said. It's just a slow drip to get people to leave, and in some cases, not a slow drip, but even a faster one. So, yeah, you just sent me a thing?
Yeah, just what you mentioned this several paragraphs ago reminded me of this. This was, I know a couple of other like outlets kind of reported on this back in September, but I know Brett Wilkins, a friend to the show, wrote an article regarding Benjamin. I have to find where he was. At the UN General Assembly. This was back in September.
Yeah.
Netanyahu showed this map, which he called the New Middle East.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds about right. That's like the Euphrates over to the Nile.
Right. Well, right. So basically in that map, we see Israel fully filled in.
Yeah.
So West Bank gone, East Jerusalem gone, Gaza gone. Yeah. But then like
all that area in green is from the Euphrates to the Nile. Probably further than.
Yes.
Because if that's Egypt, really, so the Nile's in the middle of that. So you know.
So that big sliver of that river in between Saudi Arabia and Egypt.
Yeah, that little sea.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's
Yeah, no, this is like the this bit. This isn't a river. That's like
it's instant within.
Yeah, Egypt, it's like in here. It's like from here down.
My geography is bad right now, but
no,
but the idea is that just to eliminate Palestine, but developing relations with all of these countries in the Middle East, which is again where Egypt comes to play in like what you.
Yeah.
So you know, obviously pay off their debt.
Mm-hmm.
If you take our slaves,
right?
Essentially,
yes.
So,
well, I mean, it's like do what you want with these people. Here's money. Like we're gonna force march them to you.
Right.
So, yeah. Meanwhile, Egyptians who desperately need their own aid and care are going to be ignored.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And then Israel will then start blaming Egypt for retaliation against it. And then they'll go after it.
Find a reason to go after it. And yeah.
And then we'll support it with military aid, and you know, then it'll be the Saudis next, and then, you know, this is invasion. But yeah. Well, on that note,
yeah, so we definitely need to have a lighter show next week. Assuming
we'll try. Even then, it might be a bit like depressing. Sorries. It's like the world. My apologies. If I could fix, I would.
You're gonna depress the people the day before Thanksgiving.
It's okay. They'll get boats. It'll be fine. You know, we'll figure it out. But
well, speaking of, so that's our show. So let's look.
Who are these people?
Article that I'm going to reference, it's nuts. Like, I mean, in a way, I have to give, I forgot the journalist's name right now, but I have to give props for actually doing this. And I have to give props to Danielle Weiss, again, this woman on the right, you know, just for being blatantly honest in terms of her Zionism. You know, and like, you know, I can appreciate that because you know where she stands and you know of her intent in terms of, you know, why the things that she's done and essentially why she is a Zionist and, you know, what's her intention in terms of her role within the settler movement in the West Bank. So again, just to
settler movement, sure,
that's what they call themselves. So just to give you a little bit of background about Daniela, she actually was mayor of Kedouim. I assume that's in the West Bank. For I think about at least 6 years. Born in Palestine, but she is one of the movement. She's one of the big dogs in terms of the settler movement in the West Bank. You know, since the 90s.
Right.
So she did an interview. Let's see. Catch up. So she did an interview with the New Yorker with Isaac Choina.
Ambitions of a rider. Sorry, what?
The extreme ambitions of West Bank settlers, a leader of the settlement movement on expanding into Gaza, and a vision for the Jewish state. So, as I said, this kind of went mini viral over the weekend, and I thought it was just, it kind of gives, like, again, talking about the IDF. So I'm kind of glad that we did that, my former segment, to give context to it. Now we have the visuals and everything. Now we get to hear, you know, her side.
Right.
In terms of her vision, you know, for the West Bank and the Israeli state. So for decades, Danielle Weiss has been one of the leaders of Israel's settler movement. Weiss became involved in settlement politics in the wake of the 1967 war. In the early 70s, her family moved to the settlements in the West Bank, and she later served for a decade as mayor of Kedouim, a community in the north. She has also been arrested numerous times, including for assaulting a police officer and interfering with an investigation into the destruction of Palestinian property. More recently, she has been affiliated with the Nakala Settlement Organization, which helps younger settlers establish illegal outposts in the West Bank, an initiative that's controversial even among the settler community. Weiss is a neighbor and ally of Bezalel Smotrich, the extremist Minister of Finance, who has said that the Palestinian people do not exist and that Palestinian communities need to be erased. He also lives in Kennewick.
Okay.
Weiss and I really recently spoke by phone. Since the Hamas massacre of October 7th, Benjamin Netanyahu's government, in addition to invading Gaza, has, with its allies in the settler movement, become increasingly aggressive in the West Bank. 16 Palestinian communities have been removed from their land, and 175 Palestinians have been killed. I wanted to talk to Weiss to understand the extremism of the settler movement and her ultimate intentions for the West Bank. During our conversation, edited for length and clarity, we also discussed how her religious attitudes shape her view of the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, why human rights should not be considered universal, and why she should not be expected to mourn for dead Palestinian children. So you already see the fuck shit already.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
so you can tell this is going to be a doozy of an interview. But yeah. So, anyway, so he continues. Where are you from? I was born in Israel in 1945, 3 years before the birth of the modern Jewish state. I was born in the Tel Aviv area. And your parents? My father was born in the United States. My mother was born in Warsaw, Poland, and she immigrated with her parents to Israel when she was a year old. She became to Israel many years before the state of Israel was born. How would you describe the settler movement? I see the settler movement today as a direct continuation of the settler movement of 120, 30, 40 years ago. I see it as a chapter in the history of Zionism, and we are one of those chapters of modern Zionism. Settlement is the way to return to Zion. You said settlement is the way to return to Zion. Yes, it's the end of dispersion and the beginning of the revival of the nation in this homeland.
Okay.
What are the borders of that Jewish nation? The borders of the homeland of the Jews are the Euphrates in the east and the Nile in the southwest. This would include the territory of multiple Middle Eastern countries, as well as the territory that Israel controls today.
Right.
Right? We've talked about this, right?
More than just Israel. Yes.
More than just Israel. So that's why
like
Egypt,
Syria,
Jordan,
and Egypt,
Syria,
and
Lebanon are not fucking with Israel right now.
So hold on. Pause. Because
yes,
from the Euphrates to the Nile. Okay, so we're going to take one river and go to another river. It's very similar to another phrase I've heard recently.
Yep.
But also, it's a lot bigger of an area you want to control than just from the river to the sea. You want to the Nile. So you want from the river to the river.
You know what? I thought of this. Can you pull up a map of the Middle East? Just to give people context.
I can do that.
Yeah, I think it's very important to kind of see what she's talking about. Because, as you said, Palestinians are demanding from the river to the sea. So basically, they're saying from the Jordan to the Mediterranean.
Right.
So basically, that sliver of what is Palestine/Israel. So
here's Jerusalem. Right. There's Tel Aviv. Right. So if we back out here, right, this should be. Well, Nile's going to be like over here.
Egypt. So, over there. Yeah. So over there.
Yeah.
That's the Nile in Egypt.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I imagine through here, through Cairo.
The Euphrates is going to be to the east in like Saudi Arabia area. Like over there. So.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, a lot bigger than from here to here.
Right. So yeah.
From here.
So
like way over here. I mean, we could literally do. How about Euphrates River? It's in Iraq.
Iraq, yeah.
So we go. That's the river. So we zoom outies. Keep zooming. Come on. So
Right.
yeah, from here to here.
Right. So, and there's significance for that because that's a trade route.
Yes. I mean, one of the, it's literally like the trade route.
That's
like,
the trade route.
Classically.
Right. But that's what Israel, with help of the West, want to take.
Yeah.
You know, so, but regardless, you know, I will get more into this later, but when Palestinians say from the river to the sea, that's some bullshit, you know, but she's saying from the Euphrates to the Nile, which is a bigger territory, you know, that's seemingly okay. So, and as I said, we'll get more into that later. Actually, let's talk about this here. There's a Palestinian slogan that has become very controversial: from the river to the sea, which means from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean. It's controversial because it would include all the land that currently makes up Israel. But you're saying from the river to the, what is controversial? So then I asked, what is controversial? Palestinians sometimes use the slogan from the river to the sea, but what you're saying is that from the river to the Nile is the Jewish homeland.
No.
Correct?
No.
No.
She's saying a different river.
Right. So like, this dude fucked up. And I wonder
he
if
doesn't
that's
know. He assumed that that's the river, but the Euphrates is in Iraq, the Nile's in Egypt.
Right.
Like, so no.
So no. So homeboy doesn't know his geography, or he didn't catch that.
I mean, I didn't unless I Googled, but luckily, you know, like I'm smart boy. I go, I don't know where this is at. Let me look at map. Okay, here. Okay, that's not like here. Like that's not
right.
Okay.
So,
but of course,
if someone decides to invent a new religion today, who will decide the rules? The First Nation that got the word from God, the promise from God. The First Nation is the one who has the right to it. The others that follow, Christianity and Islam, with their demands, with their perceptions, they're imitating what exists already. So why in Israel? They could be anywhere in the world. They came after us in a double sense.
Okay. Pause. Okay, pause. Do you fucking think? Are you so fucking stupid that you think the Jews are the first religion? Let's fucking start with that bullshit right there. Okay, like look, like fucking cut head. You know that other river you were talking about? That one about the Nile?
Euphrates.
Y'all know y'all had like Ra and fucking Hemotep before. And like what are they? What are they? I don't know. Depictions of Mesopotamian gods that got fucking like which were then depictions of like the other African gods that like
which is mentioned in the Old Testament.
Yes.
So
yes, we get like Baal and like there's like y'all motherfucker need to reread that Old Testament. I know it's tough. I know it's in Hebrew, but like you know, I mean, I don't know. Like, I mean, you remember how Moses brought like some fucking shit, and then there was another religion that didn't. Okay, just saying. Just saying. Like
anyway,
whatever.
At least you're having fun with that.
I mean, you might as well.
Yeah. When did you first get involved in the settler movement? In 1967, in the 6-Day War. The 6-Day War was such a miracle and aroused very deep feelings toward the birthplace of our nation. Hebron, Shiloh, Jericho, Nablus. And because of the miracle of the war, we had this spiritual sensation.
They think a fucking war is a miracle. Okay, continue.
And because of the miracle of the war, we had this spiritual sensation that something happened in the dimensions of a biblical scene. I felt that I wanted to be an active part in this miraculous happening. My husband didn't like the idea of moving from Tel Aviv to the mountains of Judea and Samaria. He liked our life near Tel Aviv. But then, when the Yom Kippur War broke out in 1973, I became involved in a very intensive way, and so did my husband. We both became part of a settler movement of Gush Enuim, the movement that established communities in Judea and Samaria. I forced my husband to follow me and our 2 daughters, they were little ones, to a tiny tent on the mountains of Samaria where we all live today. Now we have a big family with 4 generations. My mother-in-law came with us, and then we had our daughters and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They were all settlers in Samaria.
Okay.
In a lot of these places where settlements have been developed from 1967 to the present day, there have been Palestinian communities and Palestinian families. What is your feeling about where these people should go? It's the opposite. None of the communities in Judea and Samaria are founded on an Arab place or property, and whoever says this is a liar. I wonder why you said it. Why did you say that since you have no idea about the real facts of history? That's not true. The opposite is true. Who got this idea into your mind? Palestinian communities have been removed from their land, kicked off their land by, no, you never read things like that. No, there are no pictures. According to a report by BSLM, an Israeli human rights group, parts of Kejuim, where Weiss lives, were built on private Palestinian land in 2006. He's now found that privately owned Palestinian land comprised nearly 40% of the territory of West Bank settlements and outposts.
Yeah, there's no pictures. Are you fucking?
Why the fuck you lying? Why you always lying? Oh my God! Stop you fucking lying!
Like stop it! Fucking, there's no pictures. Get the fuck. Like, there's pictures from fucking 1948, homegirl. Like, you know, like, what do you, there's pictures of before. It wasn't just like rocks and rubble then.
Oh, no. And hold on to that, because I got more that talks about that in a different, not picture, the video.
Okay. So, oh, you mean of like secular Palestine when it was like fucking roaring 20 cars were rolling by and
something like that. Something like that. But
yeah.
But yeah, we'll get to it. Okay. I'm a little surprised you are denying this. I thought you were going to say it's okay to kick Palestinians off land because it belongs to Jewish people. You did no homework before you interviewed me. Everything that you say is the opposite of my personality and my philosophy. You're interviewing a person and you don't know anything about it. It's very strange. I've never encountered a situation like this. I was trying to understand where Palestinians who live in the West Bank should go. Why should they go? Why should they go? They should stay where they are, you're saying. They should accept the fact that the land of Israel, there is only one sovereign. This is the issue. So let's not confuse things. We, the Jews, are the sovereigns in the state of Israel and in the land of Israel. They have to accept it.
If it was the shoe on the other foot, would you? No.
If they accept it, should they receive full voting rights and things like that? In the state of Israel, they have the right to vote for the Knesset because Ben-Gurion gave them this right.
Yep.
He trusted them, and even if he didn't trust them, he didn't have much of a choice. 3 years after the Holocaust, he wanted to have a state for the Jews, and he knew the world would make problems with the issue of voting. But in the 75 years since independence, the Arabs in the state of Israel and the Arab members of the Knesset showed in every possible way that their idea is to establish a Palestinian state. They are not working for the interests of the state of Israel. So I think the Arabs in Judea and Samaria have no right to ask for rights or take part in the elections for the cassette. They lost their right to vote for the cassette. They will never get this right. They will have their own Palestinian Authority where they can run their civilian affairs in a logical way, but not as members of the cassette. No, no,
Cassette.
no.
Silent K.
So rights are not some sort of universal thing every person has. There's something that you can win or lose. That's right.
Okay.
You've been part of the settlement movement during a lot of different. How do you feel that the current government of the past year has been treating settlers broadly compared with past government? I will say that it's better under Netanyahu. It doesn't satisfy my ambitions and my dreams and my plans, but there are 800,000 Jews or settlers if you want. So this gives me a lot of encouragement that from that 800,000 will become 2 million, then 3 million. When you say that the government's been better but hasn't realized your dreams, what are those dreams? 2 million Jews in Judea and Samaria, more settlements, more farms, bigger cities. When you say that you want more Jews in the West Bank, is your idea that the Palestinians there and the Jews will live side by side as friends, or that if they accept our sovereignty, they can live there? So they should accept the sovereign power, but that doesn't necessarily mean having rights. It just means accepting the sovereign power. Right. No, I'm saying specifically that they're not going to have the right to vote for the Knesset. No, no, no. Can you talk about the settlement outpost movement and your role in that, especially with young people that you served as somewhat of an inspiration for? A post is a basis for a bigger community. That's the name of the game. And why is that controversial even among the settlers? I don't know that it's controversial. Some might not know the process. And people say to me, I want to build a new outpost that will be as nice as the older one that we see. I say to them, it was a place with one family and now hundreds of. So this is how it started. In Israel, there's a lot of support for settlements, and this is why there have been right-wing governments for so many years. See that? Yep. So the world, and especially the United States, think there is an option for a Palestinian state. And if we continue to build communities, then we block the option for a Palestinian state. We want to close the option for a Palestinian state, and the world wants to leave the option open. It's a very simple thing to understand. So, again, I kind of admire her honesty here.
Yeah, it's like, single state solution, just we want it.
Right.
Yeah. Which is why it should be the opposite at this point.
Right.
Like, okay.
When Israel pulled out of Gaza in 2005, it also closed down settlements in the region. This was under the Sharon government. And there's been talk by some settlers since October 7th about the need to repopulate Gaza with settlement.
Yep.
What are your feelings about what should happen with Gaza? Right now, I'm on my way to a TV interview where I'm going to speak about our movement's efforts to return to Gaza, the entire Gaza, and build settlements. I think that what I also pulled is from that interview, actually.
I'll be talking about it soon, so as well. So
okay,
at least partially.
Think it was a mistake? Yeah. So you think it was a mistake to pull out of settlements nearly 20 years ago? It was a mistake. The whole world is crying now because of that. The whole world suffers from Hamas's rise.
Which y'all did.
Problem.
It is your problem, in fact.
No country in the world said they were going to accept even 1,000 people from Gaza. The world hates them. It was such a big mistake to let them rise.
Except that's not the case. There have been people accepting refugees from Gaza, including us. Right. But also, maybe it's because they don't want them forced out of their homeland. Maybe that's right. Maybe it's that. So
where should the Palestinians in Gaza go? To Sinai, to Egypt, to Turkey?
Pause.
They're not Egyptian.
They still want Egypt. They want it to fucking cut like the Nile. Right. So if they go to Egypt and in 10 fucking years you make it to the fucking Nile, where are they going to go then?
Right. Well, this is what I've been saying, is the idea of like they want them to go to the places to give the excuse, oh, we need to take over. Because as she said, from the Euphrates to the Nile. So if they go to Egypt, that's going to expand that gives them excuse to expand their territory. So they're not Egyptian or Turkish, though. Why would they go to Turkey? Okay, the Ukrainians are not French, but when the war started, they went to so many countries. Their country was being bombed, and so many of them fled west. And Gazan people are dying to go to other places. Except they can't, because you don't allow them to.
And then you bomb their fucking ways out.
I think Ukrainians wanted to go to Europe because they get bombed. And the Gazan people want to get bombed by us. Maybe one option, rather than bombing them, would be to help try to develop a society for them in Gaza, right? Okay, I wish you luck. Go ahead, go for it. So, so Green Newsom, actually, she responded to that part on Twitter. The piece that I just read.
Right.
She says, perfect example of how USA is doing to the Palestinians exactly what they accuse Russia of doing to the Ukrainians.
Yeah.
Only they say Ukraine has a right to defend itself, but Palestine doesn't. This is apparent to anyone outside the bubble of US imperialism.
Also, the fact that they are trying to equivocate the two, when that isn't there's far more evidence of Azov battalions literally in rooms where children were taught, like literally in hospitals. Like there's video and like, which we'll get to. You guys don't have video of the opposite, of Hamas in tunnels that you built. Like, which not even talking about the fact that because there's no gas coming in, how the fuck are they going to be able to pump air down there? Anyone still in the tunnels is dead. Like, you know, like even the Great Escape had to pump air into a tunnel. And that was like 60 feet or some craziness. However far fucking Brando had to crawl. Okay.
Do you feel that Nethanyahu and his government to you and your cause? He's very sympathetic, but he's not as brave as we are. We saw some horrible images on October 7th of what happened to Israeli children, and now we see some of what is happening to Palestinian children. When you see Palestinian children dying, what's your emotional reaction as a human being? I go by a very basic human law of nature. My children are prior to the children of the enemy, period. They are first. My children are first. We are talking about children. I don't know if law of nature is what we need to be looking at here. Yeah, I say my children are first.
And what about what they say? Like, they say their children are first. So you wonder why they might fucking point a stick at you. Like, it's maybe because you've been fucking bombing them. It might be a little bit of that. Fucking anyway.
So this is her. I think this is the interview that she described that she did. So it's very short. So let's take a listen to what she says here. The land of Israel belongs to the people of Israel. And all of Gaza belongs to the land of Israel. According to the map, from the Euphrates River to the Nile River. So she says it again. What if it's in our hands? We have seen the Arabs leaving their homes. We have to invade. When? Directly after the war. We can invade the northern borders immediately.
Yep. The northern borders, not Gaza,
So,
where Hamas is.
Right.
You know. Sure. Okay.
You said you wanted to say something, I think you said.
No, it's just the northern border. It's like her idea of what they fucking own is so far what everyone else even thinks they fucking own. Like, and this is, I was talking about this with Indy the other day. Like, what does it stop there? Like, who's to say they don't want to move past the Nile?
Right.
And we've been funding it.
Right.
It's using our technology and tactics and whatever. Like, it's us. And if you don't think BlackRock and whatever are in there buying up their own real estate, just like they have been in Ukraine, and they're the ones going to rebuild the stuff,
right?
Like this is money and resources to be had.
Right. Speaking of resources, we talked about how, and I know a lot of people have mentioned this before in the independent media, that there's a huge oil reserve just out the Gaza coast.
Natural gas.
So,
yeah. And where there's natural gas,
so,
there's oil.
And oil, too.
Yeah.
So that's kind of...
not to mention, between the Nile and the Euphrates, there's quite a large amount of oil and natural gas. So,
right. But then also just the Suez Canal, which is also in Egypt, you know, which is a huge trading port. So imagine Israel having control of that and basically having control. Essentially, I think you remember maybe a couple of years ago when that freighter kind of got stuck in the Suez.
Yeah, one Valdez.
Yeah, and
the one that got stuck. Yeah, in the canal.
Yeah, the one that got stuck. Yeah, that was. I think it was 2 years ago. So like that just stopped, trade for like weeks.
Yeah.
So imagine Israel having control over that.
Right.
So, but anyway, but not just those resources. I found this clip from Al Jazeera about other natural resources in the West Bank that potentially, and I'm sure a lot of people won't think of it in this way, that the settlers probably potentially want to exploit as well. So you'll see what I mean in a second.
جيت أنا عبط شجرة الزيتون من غلاتها عبطتها على في حضني.
It was precious to me, so I hugged it. I felt like I was hugging my child. I raised a tree like my child. Mafoda Gia, sorry, her name, is a Palestinian farmer in the photograph from 2005, who embraced the trunk of an olive tree after it was attacked by Israeli settlers. Since 1967, the Israeli authorities and settlers have uprooted at least 800,000 olive trees belonging to Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. They attacked about 500 trees
filled with olives.
Each tree could have filled 2 sacks of olives. Olive trees are a crucial source of income for Palestinians and a symbol of Palestinian national identity and connection to their homeland. During the 2020 olive harvest season, at least 26 Palestinians were injured, and more than 1,700 trees were vandalized by Israeli settlers. In 2021, at least 365 settler attacks against Palestinians were recorded.
So you mean it's not just October 7th?
Settler violence is being primarily designed to take over land, but also to imitate and terrorize Palestinians, according to the UN.
Intimidate, yep.
Intimidate. They destroyed my olive trees, but I grew them back.
الزيتونات ورجعن مثل ما هن وخدمناهن
I tended them and they came back even better than before.
مثل ما كانوا وزيادة أخرى فشروا المستوطنين ولا
Settlers will never be able to take my land. This is our land, not theirs.
إن الأرض إن مش لهم من هان تاتكم
We will keep resisting until the world ends.
إحنا وياهم.
So, yeah, I mean, olives are kind of important to them.
Yeah. I would argue the point, well, to the regions.
I mean, it's literally on their, what are the scars called? Kufias? Yeah. Like part of the patterning on that is leaves of an olive tree. Like that's standard.
Great. Yeah.
So,
so
that and like fish are part of that, and you know, so Desert Man said in the chat, taking their livelihood, so their income. And it's not like these trees they're not like, you know, like they take a minute to get that big, like, right, you know,
and produce the olives that they need. So
right. Yep. Well, you have Baldwin here.
So a couple more. So we have James Baldwin here, who kind of talks about. So this is kind of going back to, you know, like, you know, the phrase whenever he doesn't talk about it here, but he does mention the
something close, right?
Here. But talking about the hypocrisy in terms of phrases that when I'll let him talk. And you'll be able, you guys are smart.
If we were Irish, if we were Jewish, if we were Poles, if we had, in fact, in your mind, a frame of reference, our heroes would be your heroes too. Nat Turner would be a hero.
Oh, look, Dick Cavett.
Malcolm X might still be alive. And, you know, everyone is very proud of brave little Israel, a state against which I have nothing. You know, I don't want to be misinterpreted. I'm not an anti-Semite. But, you know, when the Israelis pick up guns, or the Poles, or the Irish, or any white man in the world says, give me liberty or give me death, the entire white world applauds. When a black man says exactly the same thing, word for word, he is judged a criminal and treated like one, and everything possible is done to make an example of this bad nigger so there won't be any more like him.
I mean, change the N word to Palestinian.
Right.
And you'll get, or anyone of color, I would argue. And
we've got this guy, by Zoomies. In order for nonviolence to work, your opponent must have a conscience. The United States has none. Replace that for Israel. You know?
Right.
Same difference, correct?
Yeah.
So,
I got one more clip. This was a gift on Monday. So, and I think this is very poignant given the protests in DC yesterday. So, but this is now. It's long, but hear every word. Most of what she said. But and I guess she's very popular on TikTok, probably for the right and not necessarily.
Yeah, what is it? Weeping the Jeebles?
Something.
My fellow Jews, we need to talk. And heads up, this will be necessarily uncomfortable for us both. The discourse on Zionism and the escalation between Israel and Palestine has completely devolved into identity politics and vitriol. Now, I'm not trying to center Jews per se, but the reality is when Jews come together and stand up for the rights of others, the world takes notice. So where we stand on this issue is very important. And we seem to be standing on two very opposite sides of the spectrum. Now, I'm worried that this situation is going to devolve further in the coming weeks and months, involving surrounding nations, potentially starting a much larger war. So at this juncture, I am urgently reaching out to my Zionist friends, family, and followers, and I hope you'll listen with your heart open. Now, I'm aware that many self-identifying Zionists believe that Jewishness and Zionism are one and the same. And I agree with you to the extent that this is the common perception. I'm also aware that many self-identifying Zionists define Zionism as self-determination for a Jewish homeland. And often the definition stops there. For me, this definition necessarily expands to at the expense of Palestinian citizens. And this is where I draw a very hard line, because to accept the former without the latter requires a large amount of dissonance. Now, you may be thinking, I'm an American Jew, what's it got to do with me? Why is it important that we consider our position on Zionism? In the world's eye, Israel is a Jewish state because it's declared itself as such. And we know with a great deal of recorded evidence that the Israeli government has been oppressing Palestinians all this time. And here's the important part. While hiding behind the shield of Judaism and the Shoah, using it as both its defense and its sword. This is so incredibly infuriating and offensive. But do you know what I find more infuriating and offensive? Genocide, murder, pain, suffering, no matter who does it, no matter who receives it. We should at least agree on that. Israel, the country which claims to be of and for the Jewish people, is by the numbers inflicting more harm, more death, more destruction onto the Palestinian people than Hamas ever did to Israel. Hamas is a terrorist organization, yes. And the Israeli government is an oppressive totalitarian regime holding far more power over money, resources, and narrative. If you're an American Jew, it's relevant that our military and our president is providing millions in funding to Israel so it can bring more might, fury, and more slaughter to innocent Palestinians. They aren't targeting Hamas, despite having the intelligence and resources to do so. They are leveling cities and bombing civilians indiscriminately. Now, if you disagree, I would be open to seeing any evidence you have of measured, precise attacks. But that's not what I've been seeing. Please don't scroll me away because these words hurt you to hear. If you're as uncomfortable as I am right now, you need to hear this so that we can grow. This is being done in our name. It's a disgrace to Jewish identity. It should offend you deeply, right down to your heart. Even if it's not you and I doing it personally, even if you have not previously defined Zionism this way, this is in fact what Zionism accomplishes. Zionism hasn't been about Jews having a homeland for some time. We have a homeland. Nobody's taking that away. For fuck's sake, Israel is backed by the U.S. military. It doesn't need to harm innocent civilians to exist, but it does, and it is, and it's using our good name to do it, and calling that Zionism. And they've been working hard a very long time to convince you and the world that Zionism and Jewishness are one and the same, thereby tethering your identity, your very being to their actions, no matter how awful they become. And if you've fallen for their absolutism, to decry their actions, well, that could feel like betraying yourself. Have you heard of cognitive dissonance? It's an ego defense we all use to reduce the discomfort we experience when our behavior or our expressed beliefs are at odds with our self-concept. And most humans will go to great lengths to reduce this discomfort. For example, pretending the threat to our belief doesn't exist. Distracting from the threat to our belief, commonly accomplished with whataboutism. Justifying the belief. Perhaps the violence is necessary retribution for an offense, or even to prevent a future offense, or we reframe the threat to our identity as for the greater good. And lastly, the one you're likely experiencing now, toward me. Discredit the source. Any direct threats to your belief can be simply dismissed as anti-Semitic. Use of this word against our own. I can't begin to tell you how upsetting that is. This should immediately feel manipulative as it leaves your mouth. Alarms should go off. Understand that this last strategy is a tool used inappropriately by Israeli and the United States authorities to protect their actions from any scrutiny at all. If this label is used in this way, it loses its power when needed for its intended purpose, ironically worsening the potency.
Collin, who's she been listening to? She been listening to me? She be talking about labels. What she know about labels? Huh?
Of real anti-Semitism. Being anti-Zionist isn't anti-Semitic. When you make this claim, you use the entirety of the Jewish diaspora as human shields. It reduces our existence, everything it means to be Jewish, all of us, every Mizrahi and Sephardi and Ashkenaz, every black, brown, Asian, mixed race Jew, every one of us standing together as one on Mount Zion, everything we have survived and rebuilt and carried on through generations, Kenachora, it reduces us to a fucking MAGA hat. This misuse brands anti-Semitism as a phrase that can't be taken seriously. In the world's eye, we become a bunch of white people crying wolf while simultaneously harming others. If this isn't how you wish to be seen, ask yourself how this has come to pass. Is this really consistent with who you consider yourself to be? And why are right-wing American politicians parenting the same talking points? Who benefits here and who loses? If the global Jewish diaspora has anyone to blame for the rise of anti-Semitism and renewed fear of living in a non-Jewish society, as, by the way, we've successfully done for thousands of years, it is the Israeli government. It's Bibi and his butthole friends. Their actions are, in fact, antithetical to Jewish teachings and everything it means to be Jewish. There is no tikkun olam, no tzedakah in their actions or their messaging. There's only greed, power, and hate. Tell me, where is that in the Torah? They don't care about what it means to be a Jew, but you should. We can't undo the damage that's been done, but we can change our minds at any time. That's the beauty of freedom. Of anybody, we should know how precious and fragile that beauty is. The most Jewish thing to do is the tzedakah of protecting the freedoms of others and openly rejecting anything that benefits Jews at the expense of others, even and especially if it means you have to reject Zionism.
I mean, next.
Yep. And girl, you're welcome to lead the religion at any time. I'm just saying. You don't got to be trapped in that thing. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? Like that Church of Latter-day Saints. I'm going to get you out, girl. It's okay. It's going to be all right.
She can, shout out to her for being so articulate and saying
absolutely.
I probably wanted to say in a better way than I ever could. And she said a lot there, but I'll just end the segment, with this in terms of what is if your freedom, let me rephrase, if your liberation is at the expense of taking away another's liberation, is that something that you really want? So, yep. And I'm just going to leave it at that. I think for our audience, I think the answer is very obvious. But as we've seen for many, it's surprising. Like we talked about how, 2/3 of the country want a ceasefire, and I've made this argument: a ceasefire in of itself is not enough, but that's where we're at. But yesterday we found where the other third of the people lie.
Yep.
And
this is classic. This is how religions are used time and time again. Right. Time and time and time again. So for me, it's like, yep. This is called manipulation. That's how this works.
are these people?
So I'm kind of surprised. I'm not really, but still kind of surprised. This issue did not take off as much as it probably should have. Oh, at least I felt like it should have. There should have been more conversation around this, over the weekend. So, so here's what happened. So there's a tweet regarding Lord Balfour's portrait at Trinity College in Cambridge in the UK, basically getting destroyed. And of course, everybody was up in arms, especially the Zionists, basically being like, how dare you, like, blah, 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 whatever, So me, obviously, being the curious little man I am, I was like, okay, so obviously there has to be some significance to this because I didn't necessarily know the history. Obviously, I know of Lord Balfour, given I grew up in the UK, but learning more about the significance of the declaration that he wrote and his ties to Israel, and then obviously, which people argue he essentially is the father of the shit that is happening in Israel and Gaza right now and has been happening, I would argue since the turn of the last century. I'm kind of surprised this hasn't gotten more discussion online as I think it should, but we're going to do that tonight, as we do sometimes. We teach you guys some shit.
Yep.
So this is going to be a short article, and it's going to be mostly video clips I pulled.
Yep.
It's from the media line. This is a new one that I just happened to find. This article is written by Steve Gannott, who writes, "Activist destroys Balfour portrait at Cambridge in protest over Israel." So he writes, at Cambridge University last Friday, a pro-Palestinian activist destroyed a portrait of Alfred Balfour, the British statesman and conservative prime minister who, as foreign minister in 1917, declared the British government's support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. The activist associated with Palestine Action sprayed red paint on the life-size portrait before slashing it with a knife. The incident is one of many recent protests linked to the Israeli-Hamas war. So here's the clip. So this is what went viral over the weekend. So if you want to play it.
Yep. If I do this and this, okay.
So obviously, the Zionists were up in arms over that. And we'll get to well, we'll talk more about that later. But the Balfour Declaration, issued during the decline of Ottoman rule and when Britain was a significant global power, has been contentious, with Palestinians demanding an apology from Britain for what they see as the start of their displacement. The declaration led to British mandatory rule in Palestine, eventually culminating in the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 and a Middle Eastern war that the displacement of more than 700,000 Palestinians. No. Forward. No.
There you go.
There we go. The Palestine Action Group argues that the Balfour Declaration initiated the ethnic cleansing of Palestine by promising land that, in the group's view, Britain had no right to give. The act of vandalism at Cambridge comes at a time when Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has called for stricter policing of protests and rising hate speech and threatening behavior, particularly in demonstrations related to the Gaza Strip conflict. Sunak emphasized the right to protest, but rejected using it to justify support for Hamas, which the UK considers a terrorist organization. Cambridge Trinity College expressed regret over the vandalism, offering support to college members affected by the incident. Oh, whatever. I'm sure that was probably no, I wouldn't say a fake, but like a duplicate. I'm sure they'll be able to replace it.
Yeah.
So I don't see it as
they'll still call it genocidal.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Why did they genocide that duplicate painting?
So you brought this.
So I brought this. This is from TRT World. So
right.
let's get into
testosterone replacement therapy world.
So let's get into the history a little bit. So obviously, as I said, I didn't know too much about this until I did some of the research over the weekend. But let's dive a little deeper because, as we said, we want to teach you guys something here.
Cool.
So let's find out a little bit more about the Balfour Declaration and why it's problematic. So we can start with this footage.
We are proud of the role that we played in the creation of the State of Israel, and we will certainly mark the centenary with pride.
This was what Theresa May had to say about the 100-year anniversary of the Balfour Declaration. But what exactly happened on November 2nd, 1917? And what was the Balfour Declaration?
Wait, 1917? That's before October 7th, Colin. That's before then.
Yes.
All about. A little bit. These 68 words were a historic promise given to the early Zionist movement by the British government for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Sir Arthur Balfour, then Foreign Secretary of Britain, wrote in a public letter to a famous British Zionist, Lord Walter Rothschild, which read,
His Majesty's government views with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country.
This was just what the Zionists were looking for, as outlined in the First Zionist Congress during its meeting in Basel, Switzerland in 1897. Zionism seeks to establish a home for the Jewish people in Palestine secured under public law. Earlier, Theodor Herzl, their founder, had failed to realize this purpose when he couldn't get support from the Ottomans or any other European ruler. But this declaration basically laid out the foundation for the State of Israel. And since the second part of the agreement, where it talks about protecting the civil and religious rights for non-Jewish communities in Palestine, was never implemented, it resulted in a great injustice towards the Palestinian people, as thousands of them lost their homeland with the creation of this new Jewish state, and the ones who remained are being treated like second-class citizens. I think the late British author and journalist Arthur Koester summed it up best when he said, "One nation solemnly promised to another nation the country of a third." What were they thinking? Well, you see, Great Britain was in the midst of World War I, and one of its biggest foes was the Ottoman Empire. So they employed the tried and tested strategy of divide and conquer. They were giving the Arabs the promise of complete and final liberation in return for rebellion against the Ottoman rulers. The Crown had decided Palestine's for the Jews, thus ensuring a perpetually divided Middle East. And 31 years after the Balfour Declaration, the State of Israel was founded. But it's not 100% certain that this was the initial goal of the British government. The results have brought devastating consequences to the Middle East. It paved the way for the longest military occupation in recent history and destabilized an entire region. So should the UK government be proud of this landmark letter? Or should they come to terms with the reality of what it's done?
Okay.
Any thoughts? I have a couple, but any thoughts before I move on to the second clip? It will kind of give more.
I mean, it sounds like Europe trying to placate the Rothschilds again.
Yep.
Nice that they're included.
Right, but there will also, but this is what I didn't know until doing the research. The British also tried to placate the Arabs as well.
Yes,
because they basically played. So the British tried to play the Zionists. We'll get more into that in the next clip. They also tried to play into the Arabs in terms of promising essentially Palestine to them, in support of getting rid of the Ottomans. And then the French were also involved because they own kind of parts of the Middle East at that time. So basically it was just a whole mess in essentially the British trying to beat the Ottomans, that they basically said to one group, we'll do this, we'll promise you this land, and then another group, we'll promise you this land, and then the French they were trying to be allyship with. So basically it was just a mess, like, finally. But one thing about the declaration that I think people might have noticed, like, which the declaration itself was vague as fuck, because and I should have pulled it separately, but it said Palestine should be a national home for the Jews. It never said anything about being the national home. There's a big difference. So it implies that it could be one, to me, or how I interpret it, like one of many.
Yeah.
So it didn't necessarily have to be Palestine per se. Again, as we know, and we've talked about on the show, you know, East Africa was considered to be the national home for the Jewish people, as was Argentina, was also considered.
And I think there was a spot in Russia
so,
too, right? If I'm not mistaken.
So, right. So it didn't necessarily have to be Palestine per se, but obviously the Zionists wanted it given, you know, spiritual implications. But, you know, but essentially, like, and I would argue that this declaration would have been more, to me, opinion versus, like, this was just one person's point of view in terms of versus having, like, you know, a group of people collectively making this decision, like in government or something like that. So, Rob, is there anything that you want to add to that?
Basically, the way that this whole Zionist operation started was to, like the video showed, is to kind of destabilize the Ottoman Empire during World War I. But then the CIA eventually got involved with MI6, meaning like British and American intelligence all got together in the late 40s and decided that its function was to keep doing what it was doing, which is to keep the Middle East basically destabilized as its function. And all the religious stuff where this is the promised land, we're going to send you guys back to your homeland, that's all just setting the groundwork for getting a bunch of people to go over there and create this flotilla, this outpost of the US that is basically just keeping Middle Eastern countries from uniting and kicking the US out, protecting their natural resources and stuff like that. So its function was exactly what the video said in World War I, and then eventually all of the Israeli intelligence, MI6, and the US all started working together to basically just create this Western outpost that's whole function is to be there to destabilize, and that's what it's doing to this day. They're not just doing what they're doing in Gaza. They're bombing Lebanon, they're bombing Syria. They are there to destabilize and keep the Arab nations from uniting. But they're actually kind of failing at that at the moment, because they're actually uniting a lot of countries that previously had beefs with each other, because they all are agreeing that Israel is actually the bigger threat than each other. So in a way, they're actually like, they're really kind of failing themselves right now. And it's a good thing. I'm glad to see this whole operation kind of fall apart at the seams. But yeah, it does seem like a bunch of, basically not even a bunch, a few rich white guys in Britain decided that this is just something that they wanted to do. And so they signed a letter. Rothschilds were involved, and Bob's your uncle. Here we are, 100 and some odd years later.
Yeah.
Well,
all right.
You brought this clip.
I want to. So after looking at that clip again, Reef knows me well. I kind of ask more questions. So my next question after that was, okay, so what was Balfour's connection to Zionists then? Like, why was he willing to write this letter? Essentially kind of basically giving Palestine away. So this clip is from Imperial War Museum. There's going to be a lot of artifacts of this show. Don't care about that. Like, you care about it, but like, that's not really the focus here. So we're going to play like the second half, of the clip, but it will kind of go into more of how the Zionists got involved to where Balfour was willing to write this declaration in the first place. So you can go ahead, Reef.
Having already made commitments to Arab nationalists and the French government, in November 1917, the British made one more promise regarding the land in Palestine, this time to Zionists seeking to set up a national Jewish state. Zionism was a social movement that began in the 1800s. It was founded on the belief that Judaism was not only a religion, but a nationality, and that Jewish people deserved a state like British or French people did. Due to historical and religious ties to the region, Palestine became the desired location for this future Jewish state.
So this armband, or brassard, was worn by a Palestinian Jewish volunteer with British forces serving in that area of the Middle East during 1918. Interestingly, there were 3 battalions of Jewish volunteers, 1 battalion of British, 1 of Americans, and 1 of Palestinian Jews. The British volunteers weren't really interested in Zionism at all. They were more interested in using that military service to the Crown to assimilate into British society. It was really the American volunteers and the local Jewish volunteers from Palestine who were really fired up by Zionism and wanted to use this to defeat the Ottoman Empire and secure that Jewish homeland. So what this object shows us, and the story behind it, is that although Zionism was a popular movement, the majority of Jews were not Zionists and didn't want to move to Palestine.
Jewish immigration to Palestine had been slowly increasing throughout the 1900s, mainly fueled by brutal anti-Semitism and terrible pogroms in Russia. By 1914, the Jews in Palestine numbered around 60,000, or 8% of the population. But for the British, it was Zionists elsewhere that they were concerned with. In an effort to win the support of Jewish communities in both Allied countries like the United States and enemy countries like Austria-Hungary, the UK Foreign Secretary signed the Balfour Declaration, vowing to set up a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine.
So the Balfour Declaration is signed in late 1917, in fact just after Allenby's victory at the Third Battle of Gaza. And this map shows the situation just before that battle. And it shows the confidence that the British have that they are going to win the war in the Middle East. Because let's face it, on this map, they haven't taken all of this territory yet, but they're already looking at the post-war settlement in this area. There are people within the British cabinet, Prime Minister Lloyd George is one of them, who thinks that having a Jewish homeland in Palestine is the right thing to do, but it's also politically expedient. The British and French war efforts by this time are pretty much under pressure. There's a manpower crisis, there's a crisis in raw materials. The Americans have joined the war in April 1917, and we really need the Americans to ramp up and get stuck into the war effort. So the idea is by supporting this Zionist idea, it will get Jewish financiers and industrialists in America on side, and they will put big pressure on the American government to keep them involved in the First World War and fight for the Allied cause. Now, this is an anti-Semitic idea that the Jews control world finance and business across capitalist countries. And that idea takes hold and is one of the reasons we think they can put pressure on the American government.
The declaration was vague. It said that the homeland would be in Palestine, but didn't say where. It also vowed to protect civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities, but made no mention of their political rights. For the British, these conflicting promises were worth making to assure that they came out on top in the world's first total war. And they were effective. Britain and France were victorious over the Central Powers in 1918. But now that the war was at an end, the British would have to face the consequences. The choices they made would help to spark a century of conflict. Having captured Damascus in 1918, the British military left Faisal and his men in charge of a military occupation zone, an area that Faisal declared the Arab Kingdom of Syria. However, the French were not happy. Hoping to maintain their influence in the region, they expelled Faisal in a short war. It was a crushing blow to the pan-Arab cause. Instead, it was the victorious Allied powers who drew the new borders of the Middle East in a series of conferences from 1919 to 1923. With the formation of the League of Nations, Britain and France took control under a series of mandates. These were intended to prepare the local populations for independence. Initially, France was given the mandates for Syria and Lebanon, while Britain was given the mandates for Mesopotamia and Palestine. But after Faisal's defeat, the British decided to split Palestine in two. Faisal was given the crown of Mesopotamia, and his brother Abdullah was given the crown of the newly created Transjordan. The remainder of Palestine would be strictly British.
So this 1924 map shows the Palestine that came into being after the First World War. It is not part of a pan-Arab state. In fact, there is no pan-Arab state in this region. Also, it is not an internationally controlled area or an area in which the French have any control at all. It is a British-administered League of Nations mandate. What this mandate of Palestine does have, however, written into its statute, is the Balfour Declaration of a home for the Jewish people in Palestine.
Jewish immigration to mandatory Palestine continued to grow. By 1931, there were 176,000 Jewish people living there, making up 17% of the population. This led to increased tensions, riots, and violence between the new arrivals and local Arabs who, along with existing Christian populations, were starting to see themselves not only as Arabs, but as distinctly Palestinian people.
What these new Jewish settlers bring in is lots of financial backing, and they start to buy up more and more land. So it's more the fertile agricultural land of Palestine, which actually makes the Jewish population increasingly economically dominant in the area. The British government gets very, very worried about this. In 1930, the Colonial Secretary puts forward a white paper to drastically limit Jewish immigration into the Palestine Mandate. The following year, 1931, pressure from Zionists within the British government and also world Zionist leaders talked Ramsay MacDonald into dropping the white paper. And from that moment, there is no limit on Jewish immigration into Palestine.
This reversal coincided with events elsewhere that would supercharge the conflict. In 1933, Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany and began instituting a wave of anti-Semitic policies. This sent shockwaves through the Jewish communities of Europe. However, for those seeking to flee, options were few, with most governments maintaining strict limits on Jewish immigration. For many Jews, Zionist or not, travelling to Palestine became the only option. By 1936, the Jewish contingent inside mandatory Palestine had doubled to 28% of the population. Now tensions began to escalate at an alarming rate. What began as a general strike among Palestinian Arabs in 1936 devolved into violent attacks on Jewish settlements and British military installations. This event became known as the Great Revolt.
From this point, really, you can see Palestinian Arab nationalism as opposed to pan-Arab nationalism. They're fighting against an issue, that Jewish homeland and British control in the region, that no other mandate or any other has to fight against. And they want their own Palestinian state, an independent country, free from British control.
The British response was to crush the revolt as quickly as possible with overwhelming strength. They brought a surge of new troops, more men than were serving in India at the time, and declared martial law in 1937. Favouring tactics of collective punishment, they destroyed homes and burned villages to the ground. They used aerial bombing even on urban areas and arrested, killed or exiled Arab leaders, fracturing their movement.
In addition, the British used Jewish auxiliary units to fight the Arabs during the revolt. But this is a real turnaround from 1921, when they disband the Jewish Legion. Now, in 1936-37, the British are so overstretched that they really don't care. They just need boots on the ground to sort this situation out and to end this revolt as quickly as possible. So by the end of the Arab revolt, 17% of the Arab male population are either killed, wounded, imprisoned or exiled. This really weakens the Arab cause in Palestine, just at the moment when the Jewish population is getting more and more power.
Well,
so basically, money.
Yep. As always, and trying to keep us in war.
Trying to keep us in war, but it was a way for the British to ensure their victory against the Ottomans, that essentially that they needed Zionists from the States in order to help financially back them, in essentially to help them win the war. So basically in exchange, it's like, we'll give you this if you help us out. So yeah, so the idea again, you know, that people are saying this happened since October 7th. No, you can argue even like it's been happening since the turn of the century, to be quite honest. So like, you know, with all of this stuff is in place. So hence, this is why Balfour's portrait got destroyed in Cambridge, so he can get fucked. And he can especially get fucked because I found this from another YouTube video, I forgot where. I just pulled the screenshot of it. But I'm sure Balfour said this shortly after, you know, the declaration, where he says, "In Palestine, we do not propose even to go through the form of consulting the wishes of the present inhabitants of the country. The four great powers," so that's Britain, France, America, and the Soviet Union, "are committed to Zionism. And Zionism, be it right or wrong, good or bad, is rooted in age-long traditions, in present needs, in future hopes, of far profounder import than the desires and prejudices of the 700,000 Arabs who now inhabit that ancient land." So basically Balfour basically said, fuck the Arabs, the Zionists got this. So, I mean, what else does it say? Is just like a stereotypical imperialist who sold out the Arabs to gain control over an area of the world that essentially the British had no right to. And they essentially gave it away to Zionists for money.
Well, anything to finish up with, Rob, before we head to our last story for you, probably?
Yeah, I might miss the last story about the pier. So I'm going to just comment on that right now because it is pertinent to what we're talking about right now. Israel's function right now, and a lot of the motivation behind what they're actually doing in Gaza right now, while it is ideological, it is also monetary, financial. So what they're actually trying to do, and my theory, and I think a lot of people would agree with me, is that they're going to try to finish up the Ben Gurion Canal, which goes through northern Gaza.
Which we talked about it, Reef, right?
Yep.
Good moment.
The Ben Gurion Canal, for people that don't know, is it's right next to the Suez Canal, which is in Egypt. So the idea is that Israel wants to become players when it comes to maritime trade routes, and they want to create a competitor to the Suez Canal, which goes right through northern Gaza. And some of the original plans for this were to detonate 50 to 100 nuclear bombs to actually create the canal.
Yep.
Yeah, it's crazy. So like they're actually
idea,
pretty close to getting it done. And if you're asking yourself what the cherry on top for the Zionists are monetarily for this, it's not just the creation of this canal, which is going to make them billions of dollars, and it will effectively make them well, it'll sort of make them maritime superstars as long as until Yemen stops blocking the Bab el-Mandeb Canal south of that. But that's neither here nor there. The other thing is that they have $600 billion worth of liquefied natural gas off of the coast of Gaza, which they also want to have access to. So the pier, my theory is, and I think everyone can agree this is an option at least, is that pier that they're going to build for humanitarian purposes is likely going to start out being some sort of like, they'll spin it as it's some sort of we're only going to put it in it's going to be there for a couple of days or a couple of months or a couple of years, but then it'll actually turn into a hub for stealing all the liquefied natural gas off of the coast of Gaza and then transporting it from this pier, which will likely become a dock or some sort of place where they can actually pump the liquefied natural gas, and then they'll run it right through the Ben Gurion Canal into the Red Sea. So we're going to see, I think that pier is likely some sort of like, they're laying the groundwork for actually stealing all of the Palestinians' liquefied natural gas resources.
I mean, Reef, didn't I say on Twitter, and I tagged you, like when they mentioned about this port, I was like, sounds like they're trying to build a Ben Gurion Canal to me. And again, we talked about the Ben Gurion Canal extensively here. So it makes complete sense, that all of this is motivated by money. All of this is motivated by ripping Palestine off of their natural resources to the displacement and genocide of people who have been living there somewhat peacefully for centuries. And that's what mainstream media is not going to tell you. And that's why, again, going back to our original segment, we're going to be in trouble because we actually do report on this stuff and we have a reason to report on this stuff, and the Zionists are not going to like it.
Which is why they demonetize us, which, speaking of monies, you can give it to us this way at co-v.com/Indie News Network. Just scan that QR code. If you're in the live chat, you can put !donate and it'll give you that link. Fun stuff may happen if you do that. So, also, if you can't give us monies, do some of this, like and subscribe, share, leave a comment, help us get to 2K. We're getting there. Let us know what number you got.
these people?
We get to blame it on a Bibi. Are you ready? Are you ready to blame it on the bookie? I mean, Bibi, Colin?
Sure.
So I brought Miss Caitlin Johnstone, one of our favorites here, who seems to be able to say the things we think in a way that actually makes sense and not just the jumble of words and emotions in our head. So she writes, blaming it all on Bibi. Coming under fierce attack for supporting genocide, the U.S. establishment has decided to blame it all on Netanyahu to insulate itself from further condemnation. Right? So they're really going to try to pin all the blame for the incineration of Gaza on Benjamin Netanyahu so that nothing has to change when this is over. The Western Empire has chosen a single scapegoat to carry away its sins so the status quo can march on unhindered by guilt or conscience. They want everyone to pin all the blame for Gaza genocide on Netanyahu, but this is not all the fault of Netanyahu. It's the fault of the entire Israeli state. It's the fault of Joe Biden. It's the fault of the Democrats. It's the fault of the Israeli supporters on Capitol Hill. It's the fault of the Western press. It's the fault of the Israel lobby. It's the fault of the unelected empire managers in U.S. government agencies. Is the fault of the entire U.S. empire and all its imperial member states like Australia, the UK, the EU, and Canada. But as you mentioned earlier, Colin, in your previous segment, education also is partly to blame, correct?
Correct.
So I wanted to bring the other side of the education coin. You saw how Israelis are more than willing to take away Palestinians' education, but what about their own people? What do you think? What do you think's happening there, Colin?
You've probably asked yourself, how does someone react to genocide? Like this.
With your babies here.
The answer is they've been conditioned to, and it starts in their education system. Here are 3 examples of how Israel teaches the dehumanization of Palestinians. According to this Israeli professor's research, Israeli textbooks show Palestinians, or Arabs as they're called, as caricatures of primitive farmers, hordes of refugees, or they're masked and painted as terrorists.
You cannot find one photograph of a human being who is a Palestinian.
And it might explain how you end up with videos like this.
We need to kill Arabs.
The way they are represented are as the problems and threats. And since they never or hardly ever meet Palestinians face to face or speak to them, although they may live 50 to 100 meters from them, this is what they know.
If you type map of Israel in Hebrew into Google, this is what you'll get. Notice how a lot of these maps have no clear markings showing the occupied West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip, all of which are internationally recognized as illegally occupied Palestinian territories. You'll also find this map in Israeli textbooks. It's how you end up with illegal settlers colonizing more and more Palestinian land, claiming it's their God-given right.
All this, what you say, it's belong to Israel.
And it's how you end up with scenes like this.
You have this necklace?
That's Palestine, yeah.
This is Israel.
Students in Israel are taught about the Holocaust starting in nursery school all the way to the 12th grade. Part of that learning is looking at horrifying images, or exercises that encourage students to put themselves in the shoes of the victims and relate to the experience. The identification of students with the victims isn't a coincidence. It's an intentional policy by the Israeli Ministry of Education. It's how you end up with a society where, according to one Israeli professor, every Jewish Israeli citizen is a Holocaust survivor or a potential victim of future Holocaust-like events.
The goal is traumatization and revenge, and not to let the fire of vengeance die out. However, this vengeance is not directed towards the German persecutors and their collaborators in Europe, but towards Palestinian colonized subjects who are Nazified.
Mm-hmm.
That's the bit that kills me.
I know.
It's the Germans, well, Europe,
yes,
were the ones that prosecuted you and victimize you, but then like you're taking it out on the Palestinians.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And like the cognitive dissonance of that, especially with the Zionists that I see online, it's just like it's almost like it doesn't compute with them that you should be your issue is Europe, really.
Yeah.
Not the Palestinians who you're essentially kind of taking that land from.
Yeah.
But anyway, go on. You can continue.
Yes, I found this and it was like, oh, okay.
This vengeance is not directed towards the German persecutors and their collaborators in Europe, but towards Palestinian colonized subjects who are Nazified.
The fact that Palestinians had nothing to do with the Holocaust and that they are the ones currently being exterminated seems to be irrelevant. With this weaponization of the Holocaust, Zionism isn't seen for the settler colonial racist ideology that it is, but as the savior of the Jewish people. And it's this thinking and this fear that is weaponized to justify the violence of the Zionist state. That it must exist and do whatever is necessary to defend itself so that another Holocaust would never happen again. That's how you end up with videos like this.
It is a terrorist organization which murders Jews because they're Jews.
Once the Jewish people were defenseless, no longer.
So why does this matter? Israelis spent 12 years in this education system, teaching them to dehumanize Palestinians and see them as people looking to eliminate Jews, not an oppressed, colonized people looking for freedom. And once they graduate, most Jewish Israelis will go straight to the military to do their 2 to 3 years of mandatory service, where they become the front lines of apartheid and occupation. That's how we end up with videos like this. So why do all this? Well, Israel can only exist as a Jewish state if it manages demographics to maintain a Jewish majority. And it does so by displacing, imprisoning, and murdering Palestinians routinely. And the only way to get Jews to participate in this is by convincing them that it's the only way for them to exist safely. Seeing Palestinians as people who want to live in peace and be free doesn't fit into that plan. Subscribe for more and support us on Patreon.
So, any questions?
Who is this from?
Uncivilized.
Okay.
Yep. So you can find them. They're around, but
not
anything...
questions, but yeah, I have something I want to say.
Please.
Actually, I'm gonna wait because I lost the train of thought. But I'll get back to it, I'm sure.
Okay. Well, Caitlin continues by trying to make this mass atrocity solely the fault of Netanyahu and not the giant sprawling network of immensely powerful institutions which made it possible. They're working to ensure that no changes will need to be made to any of those institutions. It's just like how they made a scapegoat of Judith Miller for the entire mass media's war propaganda in the lead up to the Iraq invasion and let all the blame for the war hang on Bush before completely rehabilitating Bush's image during the Trump administration and deciding he's a pretty great guy after all. No meaningful changes were ever made to ensure that U.S. power alliance never repeats its horrible crimes after Iraq, which is why it keeps repeating horrible crimes. The trouble with Israeli apologia on Gaza is that at first glance its talking points sound legit if you don't know much about Israel-Palestine, like Israel has the right to defend itself, or they need to get rid of Hamas because of October 7th, etc. It would sound entirely reasonable if you didn't know that Israel is a settler colonialist apartheid state who has been murdering, abusing, and stealing from indigenous population of the land for generations. The amount of energy needed to see through the talking points is far greater than the amount of energy needed to speak them. It's one of those, a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth even gets its pants on kind of deals. Which is why it's miraculous that so many people around the world are getting educated enough to see through the lies and support the Palestinians. How are they getting educated enough? Mostly through online content, which sums up the situation quickly and concisely enough for them to understand easily. That's the only way the truth can move quickly enough to catch up with the lies, and that's the role TikTok has played here, which is why we've seen Israel lobbyists and the ADL shrieking their lungs out about it for months. Saying TikTok must be suppressing pro-Israel content because pro-Palestinian content is more popular is like saying they're suppressing flat earth content because round earth content is more popular. Pro-Israel content is just less popular in general, which is why the gap is the same on Facebook and Instagram. The US government is like, no, it's not censorship. We're just using state power to ensure that popular speech platforms are only allowed to exist if they can be controlled by US government agencies. Forgotten in all this is the news that Israel literally tortured UN staff to extract false statements about UNRWA having Hamas connections. They tortured UN staff. If we had anything remotely like objective news reporting in the Western press, this would have been the top story everywhere for days.
I mean, honestly, if we were on our P's and Q's in independent media. That should also be news too.
Yeah. So,
but yeah, I figured I remembered what I wanted to say.
Okay.
It's amazing that after all of this is said and done, like, I think for me, just basically as a Black man, you know, and knowing my history, I'm able to kind of sympathize with other oppressed people easily. Like, in terms of, you know, even just as recently as my grandparents, what they had to, like, my parents were not that far out from slavery themselves. They were about maybe, I think at best, about 40 years out.
Yeah.
From abolition of slavery in the Caribbean, but even then you can argue that it was still more pretty much enslaved. The plantation still existed even to the point when my dad was alive.
Angola.
But
Angola. No, I'm just saying it's yes, but plantations still exist. They're just renamed prisons now.
But it's like, with everything that's going on, and I think you said this before on another stream, it's almost giving Israel another justification to feel safe, given how, you know, they're not winning the PR war right now. Like, and basically it's gotten to the point where people hate Israel because they're being identified, they're being exposed for what they are. And so I kind of am fear of that because it's going to give more. I think you've seen the doubling down now in terms of, oh, people hate Israel because of, you know, XYZ. So it's more of a reason for us to have our need for safety, which in turn is going to affect Palestinians more. And I've been wondering, it's like, what kind of conversations can you have with Israelis and Zionists in general who can kind of break that propaganda that has been force-fed to them?
Yeah.
In terms of how to see that this is not a fight that you should be looking to, given your religion, assuming that you are Jewish.
Well, see, that's
given the history that we've kind of reported on here, that a lot of this is based on European colonialism and imperialism that has warped your religion in order to think and respond in the way that you do. And so I just feel like right now it's just becoming more ramped up in terms of having Israelis feel that they're feeling less safe now. And we've seen this online, like they say, complain. They're seeing all the protests. They're seeing like people being very negative about Israel. And they're kind of like, oh, I still don't feel safe. So it gives more of a justification of what's happening to Palestinians now. So I think for me, that's kind of the frustrating part, is because like we're not moving away from it. If anything, we're accelerating the issue in terms of what's happening in Palestine right now. Is giving them more of a justification to do what they're doing.
Yeah.
Because of the world's stance against Israel right now.
Well, you reminded me about the religious side of this, where I've, full disclosure, I've been an atheist for a long time, right? Partly due to, speakers who talked about those subjects, Richard Dawkins, Stephen Fry, Carl Sagan and the like, right? Where are they at? Stephen Fry right now, big supporter of Israel. Like, why does he not speak about religions as a whole? It's only one that's an issue. Like, that's this kind of stuff that frustrates me now, where I feel like a lot of the movements that would have pushed back on this have been co-opted, controlled, manipulated, and are now comfortable and safe. They have their ivory towers to live in now, and they don't need to see the same problems elsewhere. So, yeah, but I definitely wanted to bring, I don't think anyone's talked about the other side of the education system on this. So, I felt like it was important for that to, like, did you know about they're teaching kids about that stuff in, like, literally your kids' age? The ones you teach.
I didn't know that they were teaching them so young, but I'm not surprised by it either. I mean, look at here. Like, I was sharing this with Indy, I think, last weekend. Night is required reading generally about Elie Wiesel, like in most high schools in this country. I've read Night several times in middle school and high school.
Yeah.
So
well, and that's the thing too.
Like I say this, like in school, like I learned the whole, and again, it's valid given the oppression, but I learned the Holocaust up the ass. Like I knew nothing regarding, my experience in Africa other than like slaves, and the only things that I learned outside of that was because of my dad.
Yeah.
And then like any research that I had to do on my own.
For me, I grew up in the Southern school system where they still teach about the Holocaust. That was a whole, I swear, 2 weeks long, lesson every year, right? Versus no talks of Emmett Till or, it was like you might have gotten Black History Month, you might have gotten a segment or two, but none of the actual revolutionaries that actually did. No Malcolm X, no, Nat Turner, no, you know what I mean? Like none of those were coming up. So,
right.
And a lot of what we did wasn't talked about either. So that was kind of, like we read some story where someone sang a spiritual and, that was about it. And we moved on. So, like, there's definitely issues with education in this country, too, on that. Which is why you see a lot of the problems you see now with Americans not being able to see through propaganda. Which is why they want to control any of the education systems outside of that. Like TikTok, like whatever. And they're running it under the guise of responsible stewardess of social media. Like, you need to be able to control these places of fake news and conspiracy. Otherwise, you're going to miseducate people. And it's like, well, you're not educating them fucking well either. So, I'd rather them take the gamble elsewhere. So, let them figure it out. But, yeah. And I definitely think they're trying to blame it all on one group again. And letting them...
Right. Well... Well, let's get to Bibi for a second, because it's easy to target one person. We do it with Trump.
Yeah.
Like, constantly. Or any Republican official constantly. Hell, they do it to Democrats too.
Yeah.
But we don't talk about the root issue. The root issue is Zionism. You get rid of Bibi, you're just going to get another person like him, if not worse, who's just going to continue the project.
This was happening.
It's been happening.
Under different administrations in Israel.
It's just like people think that this all started because of Bibi. Granted, he's been in power pretty much for as long as we've been alive.
We just had him out. He just got reelected, really. Like, we had a different guy in there for a while. So
but again, like, he's only been in power since the 80s.
Yeah.
So this has been happening, and I'm going to make this argument. This whole thing has been happening since the turn of the century. This thing has been in motion.
Yep. More with the Balfour and what's the other?
Even before that.
What's the other conference about Africa?
Berlin.
That's it. Yeah. So.
So this has been in motion for over 100 years.
Yeah. This is League of Nations. This is all that crap.
Right. So this is not a recent thing. And even Bibi, this is not a him thing. This is an ideological idea that has been crafted among people with money and power that were educated enough to know how to accomplish their goal, and they were willing to wait long term, kind of like a lot of our right wingers here. Were willing to wait long term until they got what they wanted, and still are looking to wait long term to be able to get what they want.
Very easy for particular political members here to go, once they deal with either get a ceasefire or get Netanyahu out, like you saw Chuck Schumer trying to say things like that they need to run elections, right? It allows for, if those things then do happen, they count it as a win and run with it as a talking point, you know, and you'll see Biden going, see, I saved the democracy, and, you know, it'll be rhetorical bullshit, because we all know the problem didn't fix itself, it just went away. So
I think the difference is Bibi is just basically like, kick rocks.
Yeah.
I'm going to do what I'm going to do anyway, and
until you
will
kick me the fuck out.
Right. And even then, that's not justified, because how can we kick him out and still give money to Israel?
Yeah.
So he already has our money. So and that's the problem. The aid is unconditional. It's not based on any tangibles at all. It's just, it's Israel, it's an ally, so we're just going to naturally give them money. So the idea of Bibi being the scapegoat, I think, is very convenient for them, but I don't think it's going to work in terms of...
Who's to say if we want to world police that side of the thing too, and then occupy Israel ourselves? Like, we're building a fucking nice little pier over there so we can drop boots off if we want to, you know? Like, if they want to continue, they just switch occupiers. It's the same business developers who are going to make the money. Why do they care who, is the figurehead? So lots of things can happen between now and elections and after elections, and what, who knows what Trump's willing to do too. He's friend of AIPAC as well. So we'll see, but yep. It's one of the reasons why we're demonetized, which, you can always choose to help us in other ways at ko-fi.com/Indie News Network. We're making this little goal right there for equipment for people go up. So yeah, and if you can't support us monetarily, you can also support us by liking and subscribing, sharing to help beat the suppression, and commenting to let us know what you think. But yeah.
these people?
So I think actually that's your segment actually is a good tie into this. Because Bibi has been getting a lot of news over the last few months, especially, and given that now he was invited to speak in Congress, and now there's a hullabaloo of people basically being like, "Oh, I'm going to boycott," going to this speech or whatever. Okay, whatever. So, but he's become the scapegoat for what is happening in Israel as if he's the cause of it, and he's not. But given what I said about there's this pro-Israel like sentiment that it's actually becoming popular, like they're becoming the people that you almost love to hate. There's a reason for that. So we've kind of talked about it a little bit on the show. It's not the government per se. It's the culture that has been, cultivated by Zionism that has led to a lot of this. And Bibi really is just kind of following through on what his constituents want him to do. The mainstream media doesn't necessarily talk about that too much. So I kind of wanted to highlight that as to remind us that it's not Bibi that's the issue compared to what mainstream media might kind of tell you, like the idea like, oh, if he leaves, then everything will just vanish and like everyone will kind of think normally. No. There is an Israeli sentiment in terms of what is happening in Gaza and how essentially that they are either nothing or second-class citizens and deserve to be destroyed. So I got this article from Foreign Policy, and this was written, I think, 2 months ago by, I'm going to pronounce your name wrong. I'm sorry, but Mirav Zanzine, I guess is how you say her name or his name. But the title is, the problem isn't just Netanyahu, is Israeli society. Despite blaming the prime minister, a large majority of Jewish Israeli citizens support his destructive policies in Gaza and beyond. So they continue. When U.S. Senator Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, one of the staunchest pro-Israel lawmakers in the United States and the highest-ranking Jewish official in Washington, effectively called for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's ouster on the Senate floor in mid-March, it was a watershed moment for anyone following Israel's role in U.S. politics. Israel has been so sacrosanct in America for so long that the idea that a hawkish Democrat like Schumer would call for regime change in Israel is extraordinary. But the Senate leader's stance is fairly mainstream among Israelis. There's consensus, even within his own party, that elections should be held early. It seems like conventional wisdom in Israel that Netanyahu is dragging out the war for his own political survival, since he knows the moment it comes to a halt, Israel will focus even more resolutely on investigating the failures of October 7th and pushing for earlier elections to vote him out of office.
Well, keep in mind how we've talked about his last election issue where Israelis got upset at him because he wasn't strong enough, right? And that's what this October 6th thing is too, that because he failed in keeping people safe, failed to get hostages, yada yada, which we know how all that works. They've been ignoring every plea deal that's been made. Is they're going to put it all on Netanyahu. We talked about blame it on the Bibi. If you look for that on old Iron and Clips, but yeah.
The focus on Netanyahu is a convenient distraction from the fact that the war in Gaza is not Netanyahu's war, it is Israel's war. And the problem isn't only Netanyahu, it is the Israeli electorate. Blaming Netanyahu, who refuses to leave Israeli political life despite being on trial for corruption and presiding over the country during the worst catastrophe in its history, has eclipsed the fact that when it comes to Israeli policies on Gaza in particular, and the Palestinians in general, many Israelis are broadly aligned with Netanyahu. By a large margin, they support the current military campaign in Gaza and the government's goal of destroying Hamas, whatever the human toil for Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And we'll get to more in the numbers later. For years, Israelis have been able, through military and economic domination, to disregard the single most pressing issue facing the country, its control over millions of Palestinians. The shock and trauma inflicted by the October 7th attack opened the floodgates even further on what is considered acceptable. A large majority, 88%, of Jewish Israelis polled in January believe the astounding number of Palestinian deaths, which have surpassed 25,000 at the time, is justified. A large majority of the Jewish public also thinks that the IDF is using adequate or even too little force in Gaza. Couched with the fact that Hamas forced this war of no choice upon Israel and the people of Gaza, and that Hamas must be destroyed as a matter of Israeli survival, even the threat of imminent famine in Gaza has not provoked opposition to the campaign. You were going to say something?
Nope. Just sounds about what we were talking about earlier.
Yep. Further, in a February poll by the Israel Democracy Institute, around 2/3 of Jewish respondents, 63%, said they opposed a proposal for Israel to agree in principle to the establishment of an independent, demilitarized Palestinian state. Israeli leaders have framed the movement underway internationally for governments to unilaterally recognize Palestine as a state to be rewarded the Palestinians for the October 7th attack. You don't need a poll to discover that support of a two-state solution, much less for Palestinian basic rights of freedom and self-determination, has been steadily declining among Jewish Israelis in recent years, and today is probably the lowest it has ever been. You can just look at the positions of Israel's Jewish political parties. Almost none of them endorse a two-state solution, and the ones in power actively reject it, working fictitiously to thwart it from ever happening. So the idea that Biden and anybody in Congress is saying, oh, we're working on a two-state solution is bogus, because
they're never doing
Netanyahu basically has all said quite clearly he's not for it, has never been for it. So, but yet still Biden and others are kind of like, oh, well, that's what we're working toward. So it's a non-starter. In Bibi's words, it's a non-starter for them. So why are you trying to call out, why are you trying to push something that you know that your frenemy is saying, I don't want? But anyway, I digress. The thousands of Israelis who are once again turning out to march in the streets are not protesting the war. And that's something I want you guys to think about when you see Israeli protesting in Tel Aviv. It's not for what's happening for the Palestinians. No, fuck them. Except for a tiny handful of Israelis, Jews, and Palestinians, they are not calling for a ceasefire or to an end to the war or for peace. They are not protesting Israel's killing of unprecedented numbers of Palestinians in Gaza or its restrictions on humanitarian aid that have led to mass starvation. Some right-wing Israelis even go further by actively blocking aid from entering the Strip. They are certainly not invoking the need to end military occupation, now in its 57th year. They are primarily protesting Netanyahu's refusal to step down and what they see as his reluctance to seal a hostage deal. At a recent protest in Jerusalem, "We are not our government" signs were front and center, echoing the distinction Democrats are making between the Netanyahu government and its people. But that distinction is misleading. Putting all the blame on the prime minister misses the point. It disregards the fact that Israelis have long advanced, enabled, or come to terms with their country's system of military occupation and dehumanization of Palestinians. That's true of other members of the war cabinet who are often depicted as counterweights or alternatives to the prime minister. It wasn't Netanyahu, but his defense minister, Yoav Gallant, who called for a total siege of Gaza after October 7th. No electricity, no fuel, no food, everything will be closed. It wasn't Netanyahu, but the supposedly centrist president, Isaac Serag, who implied that every resident of Gaza is there's a ad, I think, in front.
No, it's a stupid program that wants to update.
It wasn't Netanyahu, but the supposedly centrist president, Isaac Serag, who implied that every resident of Gaza is a legitimate target when he said at the outset of the war that there is an entire nation out there that is responsible. So,
yep.
So, so they've all pretty much said, and we've reported on this many times, they want to eliminate Palestinians.
Yeah.
So, Hamas is literally just a scapegoat. Anyway, this rhetoric about civilians not aware or not involved in the October 7th onslaught is absolutely not true. He later said his words were taken out of context. Yeah, fuck that. Incendiary and genocidal language by various Israeli politicians and figures was well documented in South Africa's case at the International Court of Justice late last year,
which we covered.
Focusing on Netanyahu also ignores the rightward drift of the Israeli police politic, Israel body politic, which has normalized racism and nationalism, especially evident in mainstream media's coverage of the war. Israeli news rarely shows the suffering of Gaza, almost never platforms Palestinians, and military journals seldom challenge or scrutinize the IDF's version of events. It almost disregards the fact that Israelis are still showing up for reservist duty without question, almost 6 months into the war, despite distrusting Netanyahu's leadership and motives, and despite having already threatened to refuse duty over the government's judicial overhaul plan. That's really interesting that I don't think people necessarily think about. People are still enrolling themselves in the IDF, is basically what they're saying. So you would think if Israelis were concerned about Gaza that they would have an issue given the draft right now. But actually, but it's funny, you're hearing Hamas, and this is what I'm hearing even in that Hamas membership has increased. I will also argue that in this article that IDF enrollment has also increased.
Yeah.
Due to this sentiment as well. Despite the high number of soldiers killed since October 7th, 600, and wounded over 3,000, not including much higher numbers suffering from post-traumatic stress, mothers of soldiers are not protesting the war, a factor that played a significant role in opposition to Israel's occupation of Lebanon and eventual withdrawal. And a change of leadership won't necessarily mean meaningful policy changes. If Benny Gantz, Israel's former defense minister and IDF chief of the general staff, who is polling well against Netanyahu, were to become prime minister, it is unlikely that he would adopt policies regarding the Palestinians that are substantially different from Netanyahu's. In 2019, Gantz released an election campaign video boasting of sending parts of Gaza back to the Stone Age during his term as IDF chief of the general staff in 2014. And today, like Netanyahu, he insists on an invasion of the southern Gaza city of Rafah, where up to 1.5 million local and displaced Palestinians are now concentrated to deal with what they claim will be a final and fatal blow to Hamas. He also rejects unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state. Instead, he has at most acknowledged the possibility for Palestinians to have an entity, not a state. Indeed, as defense minister in the short-lived Naftali Bennett government in 2021, Gantz hosted Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas in his home, indicated he espoused the military's deep ingrained understanding that keeping that PA operational is a vital Israeli national security interest for maintaining control. The doctrine outlined by the Biden administration to restructure the PA and send it to Gaza along with creating a political process that would require Israeli concessions toward a Palestinian state as part of a Saudi-Israeli normalization deal, is the only alternative to Israel's protracted destruction and occupation of Gaza currently on the table. Some former Israeli government and security officials have also adopted this approach, since they understand it is the best option for Israel to stem further alienation from the American public and maintain some international legitimacy. A survey among Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel in February showed that half would support a political process along these lines. In this sense, some Israelis are at least searching for a pragmatic off-ramp. Whether this idea is realistic is also doubtful. It is unclear if the PA can be reformed sufficiently to regain legitimacy among Palestinians. Likewise, it is unlikely Hamas would disappear completely from the scene in Gaza. Nor does the proposed track outline what sorts of concessions Israel would need to make. But it could at least produce an immediate de-escalation in the form of a ceasefire, which is vital. Either way, it's notable that the US administration is proposing it, not an Israeli leader or politician. As such, the outcome of such a process would depend on how much Israelis and Palestinians respond to a ceasefire over time, and how much the United States and other actors would be prepared to push to make that happen. For now, Israelis are largely not calling for a ceasefire. As long as Netanyahu is in power, the war is almost sure to drag on, along with the risk of mass death and from starvation in Gaza, further regional escalation, and the Israeli public living in shrunken, insecure borders without ever knowing the fate of their loved ones held in Gaza. Putting all their energy into ousting Netanyahu, while understandable, keeps Israelis from assuming responsibility for their complicity in a prolonged military occupation, the destruction of Gaza, and their failure to outline a genuine political path out of the current crisis. In that sense, Netanyahu is a convenient scapegoat. Any thoughts before I move on?
No, I think it sounds about like what we talked about in multiple segments, you know? So, but yeah, I mean, this is blame Netanyahu, and you can still continue to do the problem once it's gone. So,
So I'm going to play this short clip. So this is from Miko Peled. We actually did an interview with him back, I believe, in August of last year, and actually he was featured. We actually featured that interview in a marathon segment of INN clips pertaining to Palestine on Monday. So go check that out. If not, check out this interview. I think the interview, if I remember correctly, is Israel Does Not Equal Democracy. But he did this interview with Going Underground, which is a Rumble channel. So those of you who don't know, Miko, he's Jewish. He's Israeli, but an anti-Zionist, founder of the Palestine House of Freedom, and he's actually the grandson of Abraham Katz-Nelson, who signed Israel's Declaration of Independence. So he's a big deal. His father was a general in the IDF. So if anyone could speak more into like the Zionist / Israeli occupation, it would be Miko. But he was doing this interview. We're not going to play all of it, but if you do want to watch the whole interview, it is it's Going Underground is the channel, and the interview or the interview is called "Is This the End of Israel and Zionism?" So Miko has something to say regarding the Israeli culture, which kind of relates to the article. So go ahead and we can hear what Miko.
How are people in Israel reacting to ongoing events? Previously, one Labour Party chief in Israel, Merav Michlo, said Netanyahu and Ben Gvir, the people in power in Tel Aviv right now, helped assassinate Rabin. How close is Netanyahu to assassination?
Well, I don't think he's close to assassination at all. I think he's doing exactly what his constituents want him to do.
Or do they want more?
Well, I'm sure they would. I don't know what more could they possibly do. He's massacring people by as much as humanly, I think, possible. And so I think he's doing exactly what people want. The only people who oppose him are people that want his seat. But it's not for political or ideological reasons. I mean, the Israeli society, by and large, stands behind the genocide. They've always stood behind the genocide. I mean, it's been going on since Israel was established, and the vast majority of Israeli society always stood behind it. There is some kind of, I think, a sickness that exists in racist genocidal societies, especially some of the societies that are raised and brought up and educated to be racist and genocidal. Israelis are certainly not the first. Hopefully, they'll be the last. But that is the reality, and I think Netanyahu seems to be politically, at least, very, very safe, and he's doing exactly what his constituents want.
So
sounds about right.
Yeah, so Miko, even right there, is kind of confirming, like Netanyahu, contrary to what people are saying in mainstream media, is actually doing exactly what his constituents want him to do, if not even more so. And to kind of prove that, if you can go to this next clip. So this is from Professor Kallis that I pulled. So this is from the Israel Democracy Institute. So according to the Israel Democracy Institute, 83.4% of Israeli Jews don't think that Israel should take into consideration the suffering of the civilian population in Gaza. Actually, if you can zoom in. So to what extent do you think that Israel should take into consideration the suffering of civilian Palestinian population in Gaza when planning the next phases of fighting there? So I'm going to read the general public. So 40% said not at all. 31% not so much. 9% said quite a lot. 15% said very much. 5% said I don't know. So I wouldn't say an overwhelming majority, but
yeah, I mean, well, 40% plus 40% of the public. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then if you go to the next slide, and that will end it for this segment. So this was also from Professor Collins. I just pulled the article. I'm not sure where he got this from. It looks like The Guardian, given the font. But you can see this was published in 2012. So this article states Israeli poll finds majority would be in favor of apartheid policies. 2/3 say Palestinians should not be allowed to vote if West Bank was annexed, while 3 in 4 favor segregated roads. So Harriet Sherwood in Jerusalem. So if we go down, more than 2/3 of Israeli Jews said that 2.5 million Palestinians living in the West Bank should be denied the right to vote if an area was annexed by Israel, in effect endorsing an apartheid state, according to an opinion poll reported by Inheres. 3 out of 4 are in favor of segregating roads for Israelis and Palestinians in the West Bank, and 58% believe Israel already practices apartheid against Palestinians, the poll found. So this was over a decade ago. So long story short, it's not Bibi that is the problem, it's the culture problem. And so, Bibi is a very convenient scapegoat for what an overwhelming majority of Israelis think in terms of what's happening in Gaza and how much they really want to off Palestinians. I mean, you could see online, like Abby Martin did a documentary several years ago. You can find it on YouTube where she interviews Israelis and they tell her, we need to kill them, essentially.
Yeah.
So I think now, given how people are seeing a lot of the carnage in Gaza right now, especially a lot of these Zionists who are, essentially trying to, or mouthpieces for, the occupation, are trying to modify that language a little bit in terms of making it either avoiding not talking about this at all or kind of blaming, everything else, but maybe, their own ugly hearts in terms of what they really think. But it's very evident, given what we read and kind of what we're seeing in the polling, what is happening in Gaza, at least among Israelis, is actually quite popular. And Bibi is the only reason that people are having an issue with Bibi is in terms of his lack of concern for the hostages, really. And so that's what people are protesting. It's not what's happening in Gaza. It's the idea that Bibi is willing to put the hostages under the bus in order to off Palestinians. So if that wasn't the issue, that you wouldn't see, the protests that are going on in Tel Aviv, essentially. But that's all I got.
Okay.
Any final thoughts before we end?
No, I'm just wondering, what's on the horizon for this, like
what do you
this
mean?
election. Well, this election coming up, there's going to be a lot of trying to fix it. I don't know if you remember the Iran hostage negotiation with Reagan. So there's a conspiracy out there that says essentially that was planned so that Jimmy Carter, who was originally dealing with it, essentially the minute Reagan was inaugurated, right? That deal happened, right? So, literally the day he was sworn in, that they let go of the hostages or whatever, and we know it's because they gave them weapons. So, which Reagan then had to come out and say we did. So, so yeah, this next election might be something similar to that, I'm betting. Right?
Sure.
But it's also, Bibi's gotten blamed before for stuff, and he's more than willing to crucify himself in that regard. So, yeah. Just, interesting subject to look at. So keep your eye out for it. But yeah, anything you want to say before we finish out?
No, just very depressing. But
Yep. Well. Ugh. So this is why we're demonetized by talking about topics like this. You can go to ko-fi.com/Indie News Network or scan the QR code on your screen. If you're in the live chat, you can put !donate. Chat that way, always appreciated. If you can't do that, you can go like and subscribe. You could hit the share button, but put it out to your social medias. You can leave a comment even. Doing all this engagement helps us beat the suppression, and we appreciate you for helping us out. We're almost at 2K. We're getting there. We're like 30 away. So hit that subscribe button.